Good morning to most, good afternoon to others, and good evening to the viewing audiences across the pond. I'm Jason Miles, your host for another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. If you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe. And if you're enjoying what you see, make sure to hit the notifications bell as we're constantly adding new episodes and doing cross streams with other channels and adding entire new shows. Speaking of shows, we had another episode of White Guy Wednesday this past Wednesday. This time our guest was our very own Quintern. He did a really cool video essay on smart border technology, the problems with that, and of course, U.S.-Mexico border relations, and the end of Title 42. That was a great episode with Cuba and Quinn. Please check that out. Also, Quinn's video essay is up on the video essay playlist. Yes, we actually have a playlist of all the video essays that we've done on this channel. It includes stuff Pascal wrote that I put images to and narrated, stuff Jean put images to for things that Cuba wrote on the history of communism in the Soviet Union. There's so many video essays that we've spent countless hours putting out. And of course, as you've heard me talk about to no end, and sadly, I can't tell you guys all of the details that are happening on the back end, but the feature-length video essay, the trailer for that, is on that playlist as well. Kayfabe. Now, with that out of the way, let me bring in a surprise guest that is filling in for our very own M. Toussaint as she is celebrating the final day of her vacation week. If you've been watching this show for a while, you've probably seen this person on. If you're a patron, you've definitely seen this person on because they were the reason I fell out of my chair and thought I broke everything. Because they made me laugh so hard. Please welcome, formerly of the Hoot and Holler podcast, Taylor Swift.
Hey! Oh my gosh, thank you.
You're also one of my favorite comedians that I never get to see live.
Well, I think it's bold at this point to call me a comedian. It has been like 9 months since I've done a show. But listen, I found out the only thing I love more than stand-up comedy is sitting on my couch getting high and watching Teen Mom. So I've also been really into Dune lately. That's taken up a lot of my time. We'll see. It's wonderful to be back. I actually almost ordered a Backstreet Boys t-shirt to wear.
Ooh.
But it was a long week.
That would have triggered me into a fit of laughter again. I have not watched the Aaron Carter series mainly because Hulu's illegal here in Mexico.
What?
It's not illegal. It's just streaming rights. So when you have a Roku TV, you can't beam anything to it, even if you have a VPN. So everybody goes, "Oh, just get a VPN." It's like, no, that's not how it works. If there's things that you just can't see, and Hulu's like a big thing, they know when you're going from one device to another. So you can't watch Hulu unless you watch it on your device, right? Your phone or a computer or something. And I just don't care to watch anything on Hulu that much.
No, and I also can't imagine a sadder evening than gathering around an iPhone watching what was a very tragic Aaron Carter documentary. That would be one of the saddest things anybody could ever witness.
Well, you're talking to one of the more tragic, sad figures that loves watching those things. One of the video essays that I took so much pride in putting together, I put it together after I watched the Lou Pearlman YouTube documentary for the 5th time.
How have we never talked about this, Jason? I am so upset.
It's called Is the On. I think I called it. I forget. I called it a Backstreet Boys song title. I can't remember what the name I called it, but it's called Is the basically it's the title, and it's like Is the Online Left a Grift? And it's all about like real con people and the difference between markets and actual cons. But I take some really good clips from that documentary and the story of Lou Pearlman, which I actually investigated further after I watched it for the fourth time. I I started digging into Lou Pearlman stories, and
Lou Pearlman, what a creep. That's yes. I feel like the only appropriate way. He was a predator. But Lou Pearlman, if I see him in hell, he better watch out.
Can you hold 1 second? Can you entertain people for 1 second?
Of course.
Sure. Thanks.
Hey guys, it's me, Taylor. Man, I said I could do this. I don't know that I can. If anybody has been paying attention, the Dune Part 2 is coming out, and I've been getting really into Dune, and I'm afraid that it's becoming my personality, which I think is dangerous as a woman in my 30s. I feel like that's a weird road to go down. Am I just going to do just like some weird... I really don't want to do stand-up for you guys. I don't know that's going to be fun for anybody. I'm very excited for Dune Part 2. Dune Part 1, I think, was one of my favorite movies of the year. It should have won, but I think they're going to do a Lord of the Rings thing, and they're just going to give... Okay, I wasn't sure. I just started talking about Dune. Why did you leave me alone with these people? I just immediately started talking about Dune, Jason. You know that's what I was either that or Taylor Swift, and I didn't know if this was a Taylor Swift crowd, and I didn't want to not be invited back on.
You're fine. Look, I've never heard... It's any crowd, right? I'm wearing a Ghoul shirt. I seriously doubt anyone watching right now knows who this band is on my shirt. You're fine. Actually, a friend of mine works for Taylor Swift. I told you that.
No, that would be information that I would remember.
like a pretty good job too.
Damn.
I'm not going to tell you what.
No, I don't blame you.
But I you know what I get a kick out of, seriously, and it's a sick kick. When I have to do, like, when an emergency like that happens and I have to take that call, and then I go like, MT or Pascal, like, be entertaining, and you see their eyes get all big. It's like, oh, I can tell you guys have never been on stage before and had everything go wrong.
Yeah.
And you better figure something out.
Yeah.
We're going to be switching things up a little bit. Usually when we do these big news roundup shows, the whole gang is in at once. But since it was kind of put together a little differently, with Taylor and I talking, and then Kuba and some other members of the gang wanted to definitely talk about some Russia-Ukraine news, we decided to kind of split the show up. So we will be leading off, as you will, with a very cheery conversation about law enforcement, abortion, legislation, poverty, all the fun topics. And then the boys will come in and talk about all the stuff that makes people leave extremely angry comments in the comment section. My favorite is when someone calls you an actor for one side or another, like you're like, there's money in it.
Yeah.
Like I'm getting some sort of check from the Kremlin. That's my favorite. Or the Democratic Party, either one.
Yeah.
Either person.
Well, according to my father, those are one and the same. So
I fucking love that shit, dude. I love it so much.
Oh, I come from like OG Fox News stock. I mean, I was watching Fox and Friends at 11. I think that probably explains a lot, to be honest.
I love it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I told you this. I don't know if I said this on air. That's how I can tell if I'm in a town that's scary or not. If you go into like the McDonald's, and have a lot of McDonald's have TVs on, and if Fox News is on the TV, it's like,
yeah,
it's not safe.
Yeah, keep rolling.
It's not safe.
It's always such like a disorienting experience, like going into like a McDonald's if you're really hungover, and then it's just like you're there and it's just like sensory overload and you're hungover, and then it's just Fox News. It's like blaring in the background. It's like, damn, I wish I were dead right now.
It's just Tucker Carlson
Yeah.
scolding you for shit you didn't do.
My dad is like inconsolable over the loss of Tucker Carlson. I'm afraid he's going to get on Twitter just to watch his show.
We did a show last year with a woman that made a fascinating documentary to me called The Brainwashing of My Father. And it's about her father, who I wouldn't say he was a hippie, but he was kind of like a silent generation, at best liberal. And he started watching cable news, and from cable news he started like getting emails, like right-wing emails, and he was, you know, a much older man.
Yeah.
And he would just sit and watch Fox News and listen to conservative radio. I think it started from conservative radio all day long, and he went from being kind of a more liberal-leaning individual to, you know, it's all Mexicans and dark people's fault, and just being violently racist. And she documents this whole thing. She's a documentary filmmaker, so she documents kind of this transformation of her father. And then towards the end, when he's not looking, they unsubscribe to all the emails he was getting. They changed his radio station and they changed the TV, and he goes back to being, you know, regular dad.
It's truly one of the wildest things I think I've ever seen, because like, and it's so funny because there's a lot of like people around like my age, like 30 and up, like talk about like how many of their parents started out at like maybe like at worst like a centrist like Republican, like, or like a rural Republican or something like that, and then it's just like straight into like QAnon territory over the last couple years. And it's to me it's just wild how it's happened, and it's scary.
So I posted this on Instagram, and I don't know if you responded to it. I don't remember if I sent it to you individually, but it was a news little clip from when they were about to make drinking and driving illegal in Texas. So it had to have been like 82, 83, I think. And there's this old man, he goes, you know, it's real communistic when you can't let a man have a beer when he's driving home. That's what communism looks like to you, huh?
That's communism to me personally. How am I supposed to steady my nerves if I can't throw back a high life while I'm driving on the pig trail down to Alpena, Arkansas? You know,
the South is one of the places where alcohol is fascinating to me. You can go into one place and it's a dry county, and it's weird, right? And then you can go into another place where there's drive-through liquor stores and drive-through daiquiri places where they just tape a straw.
I love New Orleans.
Like, you be safe now.
Yeah. Do you want this with Everclear in it?
That's the whole state, Taylor. You know, that happens in Lafayette and everywhere. Bossier City, like a whole place that goes on.
And I cannot remember who said this, or if it was just some tweet or whatever. But I think the best way to describe it is like the South is just this beautiful patchwork quilt of insane liquor laws. In my hometown, in the county that I grew up, which is Boone County, Arkansas, I don't live there anymore. They went wet in 2012.
Fuck.
And used to, when I was a teenager, we would have to drive up to Missouri to get people to buy us beer, because we're like right on the line. But in Boone County, they went wet in 2012. It's somebody threatened to blow up the Walmart if they sold alcohol.
If they sold alcohol?
Yeah.
You're like, where do these fucking suffragettes get a goddamn flux capacitor?
Hey, right? I was like, this is the biggest building in town. Like, get some goddamn hillbilly dynamite they're using to fish with. And I'm like, what's the...
I'll tell you what, motherfucker, if they do that, I'll blow this motherfucker sky high.
I know. I was like, and I'm just like, if you're fantasizing about blowing up a Walmart, it feels like you would be excited they were bringing booze to town. Like, it feels like that would also be one of your interests, but that's just me.
You've never been up for 2.5 weeks on methamphetamine.
What can I say? I have not.
you can come up with a whole bunch of great inventions.
Truly. But yeah, so alcohol in the South it's an incredible thing.
Someone says Boscor 777. When I was a kid in Michigan, they would shrink wrap the wine section on Sundays. Jesus. Again, growing up in what I believe you people call us libtards in California. Never knowing any of these things were like problems until I actually started like traveling and really being into the deep ass crevices of the United States, where you see this shit. I would just sit back like, fascinating.
Yeah. The butthole of America, as I call it.
I've been all in it.
Yeah.
All in it. Like a proctologist. You have no idea.
Like a proctologist.
I know I know the area that you're from.
Yeah. We're the Ozarks.
I've been.
I forget you've actually been to Fayetteville, haven't you?
We played a show there at a place that scared the shit out of me.
At a backspace?
Yes. Is it gone?
R.I.P. Backspace. I believe they actually like physically condemned the building. They're like, you can't have people in here.
That's not a bad idea.
No, it's not. Many tetanus shots were required due to that particular DIY space.
That space, and bless the people. And I don't say that in that Southern condescending way. I say that in the real, Christianly love way. The people that put that together, because it looked like we were going to the Blair Witch House. And whenever you pull up, it's like, what's that movie called? Green Room. I was like, oh yeah. You know where you should play? You should play Fayetteville. Just show up. The navigation directions, Taylor, directions kept sending us. I was like, nah, that can't be it.
No.
The road stops.
Literally, the road stops before you get there.
Yeah. No.
What a magical place.
It was a fun show, and there's somewhere in my collection of posters and things that I kept that there was someone that made a zine, and they had featured us in their zine.
I love that.
So yeah, there's a special place in my heart for Fayetteville. And then I think I told you too, we got yelled at the Western Sizzlin'.
Damn, a Western Sizzlin', what a place.
I miss it. Living here in Mexico, I love the food, I love the people. I definitely miss small town buffets. where you can get yelled at for just being you.
Yeah. Damn, now I want Western Sizzlin'.
When I go, because I have to go, Gene always invites me to come to Missouri, and we're always like, why?
Why?
Yeah, I mean, I live in a vacation town. Why don't you come here? Like,
listen, I agree with you, but I'm gonna pretend that I don't, and I'm gonna help him peer pressure you. We could have so much fun in Springfield. Harvey took me out to a bar called Stepchilds in Springfield. And a man we didn't know named Tony kept coming up to us and telling us how Italian he was, and that he at one point had slept with a third cousin.
Ew.
That is honest to God a true story. So come to Springfield. You could write so many albums about a 48-hour is in Springfield. Wild ass town. Insane.
I've been to Springfield before, passing through and never staying long. I don't think we played there. We played in more like Columbia, but we played in Columbia a lot.
Oh, damn. Yeah.
Columbia had some cool spots. And of course, KC and St. Louis and Joplin, actually.
Damn, Joplin, Missouri, baby. What a town. I did a show opening up for a magician one time, and didn't get paid. They said they spent their whole budget on the magician.
Was he even doing cool tricks?
No. One of them actively failed. It was... I will not out this magician.
Did he try to cut someone in half and she started saying ow and there was blood and he was like, oh fuck man, Wrong box.
Yeah, got to commit to the bit. No, Joplin's a fucking weird town.
Work with me, darling. Just...
Yeah, come on, you're embarrassing me.
You weren't complaining like this at the methadone clinic. What the fuck is wrong?
This is such a bizarre lead up to what we're going to talk about today.
I was writing the script for today. And I've been agonizing over it for the last few days. And even though Tucson is off, at first I wasn't talking to her while she was off. And so she got, I wouldn't say upset, but she was like, I can still be part of the show calls. So we've been talking about this. I've been agonizing this over, like, what should I do? What angles to take? And there's so many things that intersect. And so, finally, I couldn't sleep, and I, typing all night from 2 a.m. to whenever I sent it to you at 4 or something, my time. And then I reread it. I was like, man, this is so fucking depressing. I'm glad I have Taylor here with me.
Yeah, I love to joke about abortion.
Well, you also have something that I don't have, which is knowledge of what's going on in your state and how even before the Alito ruling came down, how it was already tough.
Yeah,
to have access to certain things, and that's one of the things we talk about on this show a lot. Is like, even though before that ruling it was tough in a lot of places for women to get abortion, and if you're in services, then the state always has a hand in your uterus. So whereas the story I kind of got inspired to do the show by doesn't necessarily talk about people in services. I do think it touches on something that a lot of people I know, I'll only speak for myself, I don't know about you, grew up with in single family homes where sometimes you had to deal with a lot because the new dude was bringing an extra paycheck to the table while you were not.
Yeah, I was really glad to when I read the article. There's a lot of things in here that I think that don't get talked about with a lot of nuance in the abortion debate. And I think there's a lot of good things to be said about it. So I'm excited.
Okay, so and just what, stop me anytime you want to just come in and say something.
Okay.
Because it's a lot. I didn't realize how many words I wrote. But before we start, again, I want to say thank you to the entire patron community and all the subscribers on YouTube and the audio only podcast version of the show. You people definitely help make the show. You people make the show possible. For those watching and listening, and you would like to support and have access to the champagne rooms past and present, be part of the live audience for the Mau Mau Hour, which will be returning. And our call-in segments that we do. We just did a call-in segment not too long ago, the last champagne room we had. I will say that Tucson and I are breaking down another video. It's not a dance video this time, much like last time. It is a rapper that I have recently discovered. We'll be breaking down that in the champagne room Tuesday, most likely with Cedric Johnson, our guest, who will be talking about his latest book, After Black Lives Matters, which is a great book. But if you want to have access to that, be a part of that, chime in with us on these very fun breakdowns. There's only one way: become a patron for as little as $2 a month or $30 for the year. It can all be yours. Also, forgot, we have to send a shout out to longtime patron Ken. Happy birthday, Ken. We appreciate you. I almost forgot.
A Taurus, we love it.
Since the Alito brief leaked, abortion has been a pivotal political issue for both the Democratic and Republican parties, with the GOP allowing their far-right religious wing to dominate the conversation, and some states trying to legislate women's ability to have abortions out of existence. As we've said many times on this show, this is something that has actually been going on for some time, since the original Roe v. Wade decision was never truly codified abortion into law. The dominant public debate around abortion is still mostly a moralizing loggerhead between Christian conservatives and liberals, filled with hypocrisy and over-exaggerated narratives. Let's be honest, excuse me. These tales of women getting abortions 9 months in is more of a description of a specific, often traumatizing medical procedure than it is just some doctor looking over at a woman who has been carrying a life for almost a year, becoming in some cases violently ill, had her body change in the most extreme ways, and the doctor look over and passively says, you still want to do this? You good? Because if you don't want to, we can tell you like, eh.
Yeah.
And the woman being like, oh, word? Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. There is a really, really great documentary. It used to be on Hulu. I know we don't like them, but it's called After Tiller.
Mm-hmm.
And it did a lot, I think, to talk about the conversation around what actually a late term abortion is,
Mm-hmm.
and how traumatic it is. So it's a huge conversation that, like, I understand, like, people, like, there's like a very like knee-jerk reaction when you say even the words late term abortion.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people do associate it with that, of just like, oh yeah, like 8.5 months in, like, I'm done, like, I don't want this child, so
yeah
yeah.
It's silly to try to even have that kind of discussion with people and try to get into the medical argument if you know anything about it is also kind of a waste of your time. It's just kind of like saying, do you really think someone's going to do all that, have all that happen to them and be like, oh, no, I'm cool, dude?
Yeah.
Really.
Insane.
Yeah. That's not a real scenario, the one that we're talking about. And in the article I read in the SF Chronicle, the story of Ruth Soloranzo is one that covers some of the darker corners of the bases around the abortion, poverty, and law enforcement discussion that we attempt to have on this show, one that really gets under your nails. Ruth Soloranzo's birth father was violently abusive, and her young mother left him and found a new man who was antithetical to her previous situation. The new man was a co-worker, a father himself. He had 4 daughters, and was deeply religious. So he was, in all accounts, a good dude. When Ruth was 11, her mom's new boyfriend, who again is a pleasant addition to her mother's life, told Ruth while alone in the car that she had beautiful legs and he wanted to see her shower. When Ruth tried to confront her mom with this, the boyfriend easily talked his way out, convincing Ruth's mom that it was just a kid exaggerating. From there on, he would drug and rape Ruth. By the time she was 13, he showed her how to take pregnancy tests and how to read the results. He impregnated her 6 times in 4 years. Ruth's stepfather's name is Edwin Quekseva, and early in his courtship with Ruth's mother, and through their marriage, Edwin convinced his wife that Ruth should join him on his solo trips to see his daughters in Southern California, a 400-mile-plus drive from Sacramento. On many of those drives is where he would not only continue his abuse, but it was when he would take Ruth to get abortions. All told, 6, starting at age 13 and coming to an end when Quekseva and Ruth's mother divorced. On those drives, he would give Ruth a fake name, make sure she knew what it was, had her call different abortion clinics in different parts of the state so she could go in and get the procedure done. From the SF Chronicle, according to a Chronicle analysis of Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates and Ann E. Casey Foundation child population totals, more than 11 million children experience sexual abuse in the U.S. each year. Like most kids pulled in this into this devastatingly common epidemic, Ruth wouldn't tell anyone for years. Unlike most survivors, she would eventually tell the police. But legal justice is a rare outcome. In years-old sex crimes where the only evidence is a survivor's haunted memory, it would take a cop who saw what others had missed and a survivor willing to relive the worst moments of her life with the man who caused them. It would take a reckoning that happened to coincide with a national turning point over abortion rights. It took Ruth several years and the emergence of the Me Too movement for her to feel compelled to tell her story. In 2018, she wrote a blog post about her ordeal, never implicating her stepfather. And finally, a few years later, after some encouragement from family, she decided to press charges against Quekseva. But of course, that wasn't going to be easy. Now, as I said earlier, this story has many intersections that we speak of when it comes to poverty, working class realism, and the current abortion debate. When Ruth reported her abuse, she was, of course, an adult. These cases, many years later, as many can imagine, are extremely taxing to research and prove. The detective assigned to Ruth's case was a mother herself, not a victim of sexual abuse, but a woman who was forced to deliver her premature stillborn child in a procedure called a medical induction abortion. According to the SF Chronicle, the detective Crystal Battaglia labored for 40 hours to deliver a stillborn son. When I originally read this, I thought to myself, are the people that attempt to argue these full-term abortions, they think it's just some flippant choice, a societal failing of morally bankrupt people? Or are the people that believe this and forward this narrative just contrarian or religious zealots? What do you think, Taylor?
I think I think there was a really interesting part of this that around evangelicalism. The stepfather in this article, he was a Seventh-day Adventist, which is a very kind of extreme branch of, I believe it's an offshoot of Baptists, I believe.
Protestants.
And there is a culture within evangelicalism that I've witnessed firsthand, and I think a lot of people in my area, because we kind of were in the epicenter of it, is that their systems and their community is set up to hide abuse, and they're also, and in that they're also the ones like at the forefront of the pro-life movement. And there's a super local example, it's very famous of it, is the Duggar family. They literally live, I think, like 12 miles up the road from me.
Mm-hmm.
And they protect abusers in their communities,
Mm-hmm.
while vilifying a lot of the times the women and girls that do get pregnant or do have to choose an abortion, because it's never like, oh, hey, I was sexually assaulted by my brother and I think that I should not continue this pregnancy. It's like, well, this child's a gift from God and you need to see it that way. So I think there's a lot in that conversation. And I think, as we were talking about earlier, like, we have so many people that are just like hooked on this cable news, and cable news is just spinning out about, like, you know, about these like stories that are like basically chain messages that you get from your mom of like, oh, you know, a woman went into an abortion clinic and she already had 3 kids, and they were like, well, you should just kill one of the alive ones. You know, it's all bullshit like that, and they just make it news, which just anybody that was on the fringes of evangelicalism is now getting sucked in. It's wild to watch.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think people believe that cable news isn't, you know, still a dominant factor in the information that people take in because of the emergence of all these different podcasts. But when you look at the most popular podcasts, they're definitely not, you know, news or current events oriented. I think, what's his name? Logan Paul has one of the biggest podcasts out right now.
That can't be true.
Yeah.
Is it? Oh God. Or it's
Joe
like Dax
Rogan.
Shepard. Like that's what like the podcasts a lot of people are listening to.
True crime stuff still dominates.
Mhm.
So, this is a very, very extremely small section of the community. And again, no one's breaking stories here. This is usually people critiquing news that already exists, or
Mhm.
or bringing stories. In our case, talking to professors and writers and stuff
Mhm.
like that. But also, too, we do, of course, read and watch the news, more so read than watch. But more from the article. A 2-year audit by a Sacramento County oversight body found that allegations of child sexual abuse are so frequent, tracking of them so poor, and detective caseloads so strained that some local law enforcement agencies mark delayed disclosures, as in Ruth's case, as information or I reports without assigning detectives to work them. Battaglia represented a 11 by 17 inch scroll of printer paper with a dark horizontal line through its center, pale pink strips of paper neatly written on, lined either side of the stripe. They read things like last school year in public school, started church, long skirts, no music, etc. First abortion, 13. In the corner of the sheet was a sort of key with a list of years corresponding to how old Ruth would have been, a codex for a child's time in hell. Again, I find this kind of fascinating because they do set the tone in telling you that she's not the only woman to make these complaints about, sexual abuse in her past. And police will take them, but they're rarely even assigning detectives to them because they just don't have the manpower. Again, reading this article, there's so many intersections of topics we discuss on this show, as many people want to defund law enforcement, something I am not opposed to. What happens to situations like these? How do you stop serial predators like this if their victims are only able to come forward when they are adults? When victims of abuse finally get in a good place to tell their story and seek some sort of closure, does the capture of their victimizer, is it closure or vengeance? Are stories like this simply propaganda, true crime titillation with a redemption arc for the victim, and a tale of a one-dimensional malevolent assailant? Do extreme tales like this help the pro-choice contingent of the abortion debate? This story does have a Hollywood ending. Ruth became an actress in New York City and is married. With the help of Detective Battaglia, Ruth was able to convince her stepfather through a series of traumatizing pretext phone calls to admit he was contrite, and that was enough to arrest him. And after a court trial, Quekseva is in prison. These calls are done without the accused knowing that they're being recorded, and in most states, the recording of them is totally legal. With so many people that care about state surveillance, is this an acceptable form of it? Do the ends always justify the means? So ultimately, is this what justice looks like? Dun, dun, dun.
What a really tough article.
Yes.
My God, I read it a couple of times, and damn, don't recommend that. Just in general, but I agree. There are a lot of layers to this, and I think it's especially important to talk about in the context of like Meta, Facebook, whatever we're calling it these days. They are turning over, like they turn over information to the police, and in just like of what privacy looks like. I think that in abortion going forward, especially in states where it's rapidly being outlawed. In Arkansas, they're trying to make it illegal to go out of state to get an abortion. I don't think they're going to be able to do that, but who knows?
How would they know? That's even scarier.
That's the thing, is like how you get into just like medical privacy concerns, I think, in this. And then you also just get into the idea of that, like, the only way they were able to bring justice, and I'm going to use that very lightly because I don't need, like, I think everybody is on a road, their own journey of abolition and prison abolition and what that actually looks like.
Mhm.
And I don't claim to have all the answers. And I think anybody that does is probably lying. Um, but it's like, how like dark of a timeline are we on that
Mhm.
the only way that this person could truly confront her abuser and try to get any closure or justice
Mhm.
was to have to call this person and have to basically beg them to admit that they had horrifically sexually abused her, excuse me, as a child. And it's like, how is that our best course of action? How are we so deeply failing kids? Because this happened to a child. Like,
Child, yeah.
I was and one thing that I thought about, like, as I was reading this article, is I was like, what was I doing at 13? You know? And it's like, I look back and, like, that's a baby. Like, 13 is a baby. And it's like, how did we get from the point where we just have failed this child over and over again to the point of basically having to re-traumatize herself in the name of, carceral justice? And it's just like, that's something that, like, I think will stick with me for a while from this article. Is just like how horrible that had to be. And like, does she feel like this is enough? Like, you know?
That's that's what actually got me as well, is the idea that you have this happen. So in the article, and I'll find it, guys. It's from the San Francisco Chronicle. I'll find it and I'll definitely put it in the chat. There should be links to the article in the description of the show today. But in reading it multiple times as well, there's a moment where her mom finally believes her, and it's
Mhm.
towards the end of her mom's marriage with the man. It doesn't really get into why the mom got divorced from this gentleman in the first place, but obviously it's not because of the abuse. The mom
Mhm.
doesn't really know, or does she turn a blind eye to it? And it also says in the conversations that Ruth has with her stepfather that they're somewhat indistinguishable. They can't really understand what he's trying to say.
Mhm.
Um, and as I read it the second time, I started to ask myself, does he call out the mom for knowing?
Yeah.
And I wondered that,
Mhm.
but again, we don't really know.
Mhm.
Um, and as a person that has had friends, definitely my mom dated some dudes that were not the coolest. Um, Definitely didn't have to deal with anything that
Mhm.
this young lady dealt with. But there's something to be said about parents being very accepting of the new person, especially when it's an extra paycheck. It's just an extra hand around the house, that you are not. They're fulfilling a need that you
Mhm.
cannot fulfill as a child.
That was something, like, I think it would be a very normal reaction when reading this article, be like, what was the mother doing? But
Mhm.
I think it's important to one, we don't have all the context around it. We don't know if she knew or when she knew. But I'm in the same boat of, like, I can't imagine what it is like to have kids that you have to take care of them and you love them. And it's like, this person comes along and you're right, they have, these financial means, and he did seem like a really good guy. Like, he wanted to lead them all to the Lord. And would that impact your ability to be able to see them unbiasedly? And like, I think it would be very easy for me to sit here and be like, oh, if I had a child, like, I would know, and this is what I would do. But I think until you're in that situation, I don't know. uh, And it's so horrific that you just really can't wrap your mind around, like, what anybody would do in any part of that situation. And I think it also just deflects blame away from the abuser, who was raping a 13-year-old child. And I think
Mhm.
that is where our anger truly needs to be directed at.
And the victimizer in this case
Mhm.
has no backstory. He
Mhm.
just kind of appears, and you hear about how horrible he is, and that's it. And he
Mhm.
goes to jail.
Yeah.
And I found that also kind of interesting. And the reason why I kind of asked the question, is this some sort of propaganda, is because as defunding the police was a major cry in 2020, and even part of the election, you have the George Floyd crime bill, which, it's kind of a crime bill in a titular nature. I don't think it really did anything. Many
No.
states had outlawed chokeholds, which I think part of that bill was to, on a federal level, to outlaw chokeholds. In places where I'm from, that thing had been outlawed since the early 80s. Which Daryl Gates, former police chief of Los Angeles, when they were, accidentally killing men left and right, especially black men, due to these illegal chokeholds, he said, "Black men's veins are different. That's why they're
What?
dying in the back of the cop cars." Yes. And there's definitely several cops, and even on the stand during the Rodney King trial, that said that had the chokehold been legal, they would have just choked him out, and they wouldn't have had to beat him that savagely. But when we talk about propaganda, which, I'm a fucking fan of.
Yeah.
I love Law and Order SVU. I love watching Ice-T as Detective Finn Tutuola.
You kidding me? Law and Order rips.
Mariska Hargitay
Oh.
is my favorite white woman in the world.
I think same. Well, second, Taylor
I
Swift
would
and then
eat
her.
mayonnaise sandwiches for her. Like it was the style. I would go to a Barry Manilow revival for her.
Damn. That's true love. We gotta get her on the show.
I had an opportunity to meet her when I was working on Yo Gabba Gabba and missed it trying to get one of the routes into the VIP after party.
Damn, I think you might have chose wrong. I'm so sorry.
I was just doing my job, and
Damn.
the cast knew that I was a huge fan, and so she and her kids at the time wanted to meet the cast, and they were looking for me, and it was so loud I couldn't hear my walkie. They were like, "Jason, come to the back of the stage now. Jason, come to the back of the stage now." I couldn't hear. And finally, when I saw them, they're like, "Dude, we were fucking trying to call you. Mariska was there. You should have seen her." So,
damn. But
still,
I think it's good. It just like it can just be like, hey, if we had met, who knows what could have happened.
I would have punched her husband.
I support that too.
You don't love her like me.
Listen, I'm anti-propaganda with a very big asterisk, except SVU.
A lot of things that I think are propaganda are less the shows, because the shows exist in such a fictional world.
Oh, yeah.
One-dimensional characters and 18-dimensional cops, which has been going on since like Hill Street Blues and shit.
Yeah.
But what I find fascinating about a story like this is it does bring up a real question to people. And I think even people on the defund abolish end of things always look at it from the reactionary aspect of cops going too far, beating up someone they see on camera or shooting somebody. Then you see a lot of this talk. But when we talk about crimes like this and serial offenders, and I don't know the answer, and I'm not saying this because I do know the answer. I'm asking the question: how do we want to treat situations like this? Working in a very large homeless shelter, you work with tons of sex offenders. And that term is on a spectrum. Some people are sex offenders because they got caught paying for sex. Definitely some people are sex offenders because they molest children. And the age range of that varies as well. And I think we all see a guy with real weird glasses and a members only jacket and a van with no windows. But, when you see younger people in their latter 20s being sex offenders as well, like pretty horrible offenders. Like I think I've said it before on this show. There was one guy that snuck a 6-year-old kid in his suitcase into the shelter. Which to this day is one of the more, I won't get into it, but everything about it kind of messes you up. Because my ideology is, you want to have not just forgiveness in your heart, but some sort of understanding that people aren't born villains. But, whenever you see something like that, you're like, well, you just created this person's villainous origin story from whatever you did to this 6-year-old little boy. And anywhere we sent him wasn't going to be much better than, what we took him out of. So, in these situations where these people are finally coming forward and we don't know if this man kept doing it, because in the article he says, I hurt a lot of people. And you're like, what the hell did you keep doing?
That particular part of that statement, I mean, I've been thinking about it since I read it. I hurt a lot of people, and it's like, how many?
Yeah.
And to answer the question about if I think this article is propaganda, I think it is, but I think also something can be an important story to tell and it also be a little bit of propaganda. They do literally plug the Detectives podcast at the end of this article.
They do, yeah.
So, I mean, just on a very, very basic level of the understanding of cop propaganda, it is. And the answer of like, what do we do to ensure that these things aren't happening to children? Like, does that involve law enforcement? I don't know. And I think that is for me, maybe I'm just like forgiving myself for being stupid, but I think that's an okay place to be of like, I don't exactly know what the road forward looks like of like, how do we make sure that we're not failing children? And I think that is something that we struggle with just as a country, as a society in general, of like, and especially in my home state of Arkansas, which I love Arkansas. Like, it's my home. I love the Ozarks. Like, but you look here and you can tell that we don't value children in our society. Like, we've got the Arkansas legislature passing all of these just like insane bills that like that are targeting trans people, or targeting women, or targeting anybody who can get pregnant. And it's like, okay, yeah, we're also like 48th in childhood literacy, or like, I think the figure in Arkansas, and it's important to note that in Arkansas we have a collection of billionaires, like billionaires with a B. We have the Tysons, we have the Waltons, we have another unnamed trucking company owners who we will not name. We have a very large collection of a lot of money up here. And in Northwest Arkansas, very particular where I'm at, they did a study a couple of years ago that 1 in 4 children are suffering from food insecurity. And it's like, so at just like a very base level of making sure that children are nourished and safe and know how to read, we're failing them. So it's like, how can we expect the cops, who already fucking suck, how can we expect them to do any better if like on other levels we're not doing the same? So it's just, so many things have to change. And now, and then you think about like, what if this exact story, so this happened in California, and I'm not going to say, oh, she had it easy because she was in California. That is not what I'm going to say at all. This child was brutalized. But then you think about like now in Arkansas, if that happened to a 13-year-old girl in Arkansas, what happens now?
That's what I wanted to ask you, because I know
Yeah.
there's certain states where you have to get things like parental consent. And he was going all over the place within the state of California to find clinics, so she could just kind of go in willy-nilly and change her name. They even had a story. I think the first abortion, she had to lie and say that she got impregnated by a young boyfriend, and she was afraid her mom was going to make her keep it. Like, they worked out all these stories, these lies that she would have to tell so he could keep doing this, which is so insane.
It is.
And then I was thinking about you as I'm writing this script, and I was like, oh, I know in her state it's even harder when you're underage. So
Mhm.
how hard is it in Arkansas right now?
Well, in Arkansas, you can't get an abortion.
Oh,
Um,
I wasn't
period.
expecting that.
No, yeah, like we had one clinic in the state that was down in Little Rock at the Little Rock Family Planning Clinic, and Arkansas was a state that the minute Roe was overturned, our trigger ban went into place. So the day that Roe was overturned, Little Rock Family Planning Clinic was calling people to cancel their appointments. Um, so I mean, since last year, so about for a full year, you can't get an abortion in the state of Arkansas at a clinic. Um, so now we have to either get people to a state where you can get it, which Arkansas is completely just in this like basically landlocked by other states that are completely anti-abortion. So Missouri, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Texas, all the ones you hear of these horrific bills coming out of, we're surrounded by. So the closest is we have to get folks to Kansas, over Overland Park, which is right outside of Kansas City. They have a clinic there that we can send people to. But how does a 13-year-old get to Kansas City?
Mhm.
Are we gonna do we gotta just put them on a Greyhound bus? And I mean, but like legitimately, or like how do we get them to St. Louis? Um, and I believe in Kansas, it's in Kansas, you have to have like if you're under 18, like your parents have to know about it, and there
Mhm.
are ways to get like judicial bypasses and all of that, but is a 13-year-old going to know that?
Mm-mm.
No. And
Should they?
exactly, no, they shouldn't. This is not something they should have to worry about at 13 years old. And so it's just what happens. And then it also just gets into being very dangerous, not just for, I mean, especially like young children who are pregnant. And if something goes wrong at a lot of places in the state of Arkansas, and now the laws are very murky about ectopic pregnancies, about you know unfinished miscarriages, all of these things, that they're like, oh, we're going to protect you from those, and they don't. And a lot of providers are very scared about losing their licenses if
Mhm.
they do any of these things. And it's just very deeply disturbing. Um and and again, I wish I had the answers. Like I wish I knew what to do, but the time to have done something about this was, I don't know, in the what, 50 years between
Yeah.
when Roe came,
Yeah.
or when the Roe decision came down from when it fell, all these Democrats that ran literally my entire life. Like, I don't remember a time when Democrats were not running on the idea of like, oh, we're gonna codify Roe, we're gonna
Yep.
codify Roe. We're past that. We're past that being able to help. And so I don't know. I think the only thing you can do is, if you're able to support your local abortion funds. I don't recommend that you give money directly to Planned Parenthood. A lot of them aren't going to help people get out of state to get the abortion access that they need. Um, your local abortion funds, or an abortion fund in a state that maybe you're not from.
Mhm.
I think that's the only thing you can do, is just to try to make sure the access is there for people that really need it. Like,
Which because abortion ultimately is an economic issue. It's not a moral issue. And I think
yeah.
all the debates for the last 50 years and before have constantly placed it as a moral issue. And I think the people that definitely fought to make it uh, as legal as they were going to make it,
Mhm.
um, their words were constantly. And one of the lawyers who passed away, that was like her dying words, like, we've been telling you for 50 years that this
Mhm.
ain't it.
Yep.
This is a pathway, but it ain't it.
Mhm.
And we've been talking about this on this show, and I really want people to understand, because so many of these podcasts always talk about things from a federal level,
Mhm.
because that's a kind of a big umbrella you can talk about. I can yell about AOC and Joe Biden to no end,
Mhm.
and maybe a villainous governor, uh, but unless you talk about like the state's rights debate, and why it's so important right
Mhm.
now, because as the Supreme Court is just throwing more and more things to the state, when we talk about homelessness, states, the federal government may allocate certain funds, but it's states that it's their responsibility to do something with those funds. And
Mhm.
recently in Tennessee, I don't know if you saw this, Taylor, their governor said that they're not going to use their federally allotted HIV funds,
Mhm.
and they are a hotbed of new HIV cases actually in the county in which Memphis is in.
In Shelby County, yeah.
Shelby County, yeah, and it's ripping through their gay population, and
Mhm.
the governor's like, not my problem.
Bill Lee, I believe is his name. Once again, I'm gonna see him right in hell. He has never seen the gates of heaven. Um, it's so wild to me how like they're not even trying to hide it anymore of like how much they hate the people in their states that do not look like them in any way. Like if you are not basically a straight white man,
Mhm.
they would honestly prefer that you passed away. And they're just getting so blatant about the fact that they want the folks in Memphis, like I cannot remember the state senator's name, but he was one of the Tennessee three that was expelled.
Yes,
And they were
yes.
just like, "Oh no, we're not going to let you get him back in."
Mhm.
And they were just like, "Oh well, we'll cut off funding to Memphis." It's like, what the fuck? Like Memphis, I love Memphis is a wonderful town,
Great city. Wonderful
fantastic.
food city too, by the
Oh
way.
my god.
Mm.
Oh baby. Oh man, I'm thinking about some barbecue right now. Um, but it Memphis is it's insane to watch how the rest of the state truly treats the people of Memphis. It's horrible.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's fascinating to me, again, how uh, the state debate and the fact that less and less power is residing within the federal government, more and more is residing within states.
Mhm.
I'm sure you saw recently Disney is pulling 2,000 jobs from Florida
Mhm.
because of the issues that they're having with their governor there. Um, it's fascinating that you don't see more people talking about, wow, it's almost as if there's 50 little nations going on right now.
And we have just elected some of the dumbest motherfuckers on the planet to lead these tiny little nations. I can't say shit. My governor's Sarah Huckabee Sanders. You
Mm,
know, it's
just a peach. Just a
damn,
joy to be around that Huckabee Sanders.
isn't she? Damn, that whole family's just stupid as
I
hell.
would love to be at a Western sizzling with her.
I wouldn't. I think you just know that bitch just touches things with her bare hands at a Western sizzling. She did a campaign event
You-
up here when she was running for governor, and it was on 9/11, and it was a 9/11 memorial pancake breakfast, and it was the most bizarre thing I've ever been to.
well, 9/11 memorials are always really odd to me.
Mhm.
There is one in the Palm Springs airport that
That feels like
they
the wrong place to celebrate. That feels a little
it's the
too on the
last
nose.
place I would ever think anyone gave a shit about the world is Palm Springs, because it's
Mm.
filled with like celebrities vacationing or really old people, right?
I have vacationed in Palm Springs, and I'll tell you, I feel very important when I'm there.
It's you can. It's a little luxury.
Mhm.
I wouldn't say it's cheap.
No, I my friend, her grandparents have a vacation house there.
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
yeah, it's not cheap,
it's a
especially
Nepo
depending on where you
vacation.
are. It's
Yeah.
and the airport is I hate flying in and out of it because I hate turbulence, and flying out of Palm Springs is like a scene from like a Die Hard on a Plane movie. It's like Con Air every time I fly out of there. And as you're getting to the and maybe you remember this, as you
Mhm.
if you flew in there,
Mhm.
as you're getting to the TSA area, there's their 9/11 memorial, which
Mhm.
is a picture of the planes exploding.
Mhm. Again, on the I did not see that.
It smacked me right. We were walking, and it was me, Ben Burgess, and our show producer Jordan going to the New York live show earlier this year. And Jordan stopped, and she was like, "That is probably the worst thing I've ever seen in an airport in my life."
Damn, that's a high bar.
Still shocked that it was, and it had people crying, and it was like, remember 9/11. I was like,
They're like,
Jesus
this could
Christ.
be you.
Yeah, like,
Don't accept any suspicious packages.
you make sure there's no brown people with you.
Jesus.
It's just like, fuck me.
That's insane. I cannot believe I missed that. That seems right up. That seems like something I would have spent significant time at.
It frightened the shit out of me because again, I hate, and yeah, I believe I thought I had a manly when the, because like as we were taking off, because you're in it's cavernous in Palm Springs, and so these air pockets hit the plane, and it actually hits it where it sounds like your plane got punched, like Debo punched your plane. My plane, punk. And the Debo punch hit the plane, and I definitely screamed, and Jordan laughed, as she should.
Yeah, as she should. Yes,
because you know, in my brain it was like, but in real life it was like, oh.
Somebody, it's a surprise that you're like, oh,
child down in the front.
It's like it's like you can't control your reaction. I've had that sometimes. Not that quite embarrassing, but I mean, I can relate.
So yeah, that mixed with the imagery of the fiery inferno that was the two towers, and then like George Bush. It's like, what the shit? Is this what Sonny Bono would have wanted?
Is this what Sonny Bono would have wanted?
Like, this isn't what Sonny Bono would have wanted at the airport.
He wouldn't have wanted that.
I feel so bad for the guys coming in behind us with the Ukraine.
I know. Yeah. Listen, I'm a tough act to follow. I'm so sorry, you guys.
But I see some people. Look, if you guys have questions or comments, please drop a super chat. I can kind of see stuff out of the corner of my eye, and we will definitely get to your question and or comment, because I feel like this is one of those topics where people will definitely have a lot to say. And if you're watching the show on a rewatch, then definitely leave something in the comments, as Toussaint will get back to you, or will it be me? You'll never know. You will never know. Hold on. One of our Ukraine people is here right now. Are you ready, Ukraine person? No? If I put you on right now, would you get mad? There is a virtual green room, and I can see the next host. And, you know, I will hint who he is, because he has a fancy new hairstyle that should get him less, I don't want to say insults, but he looks like a pundit of color. Let's just put it that way. This next person has been mistaken for a pundit of color numerous times. They are growing their hair out so they stop getting harassed by the police. Are you ready to come on right now? Okay. Please welcome C. Derek Varn.
Hello.
What's up, man?
Hi.
Have you been on stream with Taylor?
No.
Taylor, meet Derek. Derek, meet Taylor.
Hi, Derek.
Hi.
I thought your @ was ska poet for a second.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. If you saw my eyes get really big when you came on screen, that was why.
You didn't know Derek was a ska poet? All of his poetry has a trombone in it.
Yeah, I was like, I'm very interested in how this works.
Good old backbeat. All right. Yeah.
Someone said Varn's got a Jerry curl. Derek.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm fine. I am checking up on the news to see what happens in Europe this morning.
Someone needs to see you in a fedora to so you can have your true ska bona fides. Can you change your name to the ska poet?
Yeah.
Because
Would
we'll have
you-
Quinn just put your face on all the like mighty boss tones pictures and shit.
Dun, dun.
Real big fish.
Oh God.
Damn, that's a deep cut.
Dude.
Mephistopheles.
There it is. That's it.
Why don't we do a ska show? We
If
never
you have
do
a ska show, you know who you need to have on is Joshua from Hoot and Holler.
Is a ska historian.
That is one way to put it. I have listened to more ska because of Joshua Arnett than I thought was possible.
I would love to see how ska goes over in Arkansas.
You know, like most dumb things, it would probably go pretty well.
If it's 90s ska, probably okay. If it's like Trojan record ska from the 60s, maybe not.
Oh, that's a different story.
I
See, Derek's that's
Yeah.
how you know he's got plaid pants on right now.
Yeah.
That is
I think
That was me in high school, not gonna lie. Mix between goth stuff and plaid pants.
Damn.
Two people said Arkansas.
Arkansas. Wasn't it, you know, honestly, ska might go over pretty well. I think it was, I hate that I know this. Wasn't it the Mighty Boss Tones guy that came out with like an anti-vax like anthem?
Ska song?
Yeah, it was like, there was like trumpets and skanking. It was horrific. When Joshua showed it to me, I thought it was a joke, but it was apparently very serious.
Skanking to the vax, huh? To the
Yeah.
anti-vax. I need
No,
to
that's
see.
real, and it almost broke up the band.
I
after
Damn.
need to
40
see.
years.
Imagine
says-
finding out the way that somebody, okay, imagine you have like just like a crush on somebody and they post that, and you have to learn at one time that not only are they anti-vax, but they're pro-ska.
That's harsh.
I'd rather you be one or the other.
I could deal with somebody who's into ska, but you have to be vaccinated. Or if you're anti-vax, you have to listen to Leonard Skinner. There's just
Like early Doobie Brothers, and you really hate the Michael McDonald years
yes.
because that's when they got too black, even though there's always been a black guy in the group.
You gotta be really into the Allman Brothers band.
Get really into the Allman Brothers.
I can't
I'm
actually.
from
I don't,
Macon. Be careful with that.
I don't know. I'm actually I can't say anything. I'm actually very into the Allman Brothers band because I'm from Arkansas.
Well, I'm from Macon. I like
Yeah.
it's you don't get more Almond Brothers than that.
Yeah. No.
I'm looking at everybody else in the virtual green room, and I think one person is eating an ice cream sandwich. I haven't seen someone eat an ice cream sandwich over the age of 5 in decades.
Okay. Well, that you're wrong.
You got
Whoever the
a
ice
broke
cream
ass.
sandwich supporter is, I'm on your side here.
Do you have a broke ass ice cream man in your hood? Is that why?
Okay, listen. The ice cream man that comes around, he's a very nice gentleman, okay?
He doesn't sell drugs. It's actually push pops and ice cream sandwiches.
It really is. And he has a terrible schedule. Yesterday he was out at 6 p.m. during a thunderstorm. So I am just pray for the ice cream man in Fayetteville, Arkansas. He is running the wheels off that van. And there's no name brand anything. It's a real labor of love.
This motherfucker is tearing that shit up. Whatever. I can't even bring him on. Just take your time. I don't want you to get that in your hair.
Please don't choke on an ice cream sandwich on a live stream. That's
Let's bring in one of my favorite people, Deep State Kuba.
Hello, everyone.
like I can't bring him in because I wanted him to, enjoy. I want them to enjoy their food. Get a napkin. Don't use your hand.
I love the play-by-play of what's because I can't see what's happening.
The guests can't see.
I'm getting all of my information. Jason is essentially
now,
ice cream sandwich Fox News right now.
And now he's got it all over his shirt, and he's like unbuttoning the shirt.
That's why I can't eat beforehand, dude. I can't eat beforehand and on stream. Do you really want to have something in your teeth? And there's like, and then that's all the comments. I would have enjoyed the stream if it wasn't for that goddamn spinach in your teeth. You nasty piece of shit.
You need to have a button that converts people into anime girl avatars. Just flip a switch, and it's like bottom right. All right, now you're Sailor Moon.
That almost certainly exists.
Finish that ice cream sandwich as Sailor Moon, and everything will be fine.
Yeah, I think that might be a TikTok filter.
Yeah,
I feel like I've seen that one.
I feel like if you could hook up TikTok filters to restream, streaming is over.
Oh my god, dude!
That might be $1 million idea.
There's someone right now in the room. They're beating the fucking designers right now. And quickly, all of them anime women, quickly.
Where are my waifus? I need a waifu on demand button.
Let's bring in our final commentator for the day. The veteran. I mean that in a literal sense. Stefan Bertram Lee.
It wasn't even an ice cream sandwich.
It looked like ice cream. What was it?
It was just an ice cream.
Oh, okay. It looked like a goddamn ice cream sandwich. Whatever it was, I was like, just take your time. We got all day. Did you just kill something?
No.
Did you just that cool? You're like, hey.
No, my mic dropped and it scared me.
Oh, okay. Thought she was like, damn, Stefan is cool. He's like Rick Springfield in real life. Well, we're gonna get out of your guys' way because this is a Kuba, Var, and Stefan discussion. Taylor, thank you so much for hanging out with me.
Wonderful to see you.
Depressing the hell out of everyone.
Before
we go, what are you working on? Because you definitely are a busy beaver as well.
Me? I am working on finishing the first book of Dune, as I discussed earlier.
Nice.
If anyone wants to talk about it, DM me. I am working my way through Below Deck on Bravo. I am also I'm working on a couple creative projects with my former co-host and bestie Harvey, which you will inevitably be roped into. So just keep an eye out for that. We're really excited about it. Should be coming in a little bit. Not going to give us too hard of a deadline.
Look, you said reality television, and I'm all the fuck in on that.
Yeah. It's going to be good.
I will bid the audience adieu. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. Please stick around for the second half, as it's going to be the half where you guys are definitely going to get fired up and want to comment, call everybody names. So on that note, Kuba, you're going ahead, take the lead on this. And yes. Taylor and I are out. Thank you, guys.
Well, now that we've successfully gender and racially segregated the chat.
I spent a lot of time wondering where Arkansas is.
Oh, it's just south of regular Arkansas.
Yeah. Is it by Kentucky?
No, it's
really.
South of Kansas, right? North of Louisiana, south of Kansas.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, right.
Arkansas or Arkansas is basically our last defense against the Yankees. But yeah.
So, Kuba, we last talked Ukraine a long time ago now, really, last November. But in that time, not really a lot happened.
Yeah, it's basically been a giant tug of war over Bakhmut, while Russia's failed to make any kind of operational breakthroughs. Its infrastructure attacks against Ukraine have been extensive, mainly using air power rockets, but haven't succeeded in breaking the country economically or disrupting logistics enough to make a difference at the front. Meanwhile, Ukraine has like Godot's counteroffensive turned into Schrodinger's counteroffensive.
Yep.
Where we've been waiting and waiting and waiting, and the Russians said that it happened already, but it failed so badly that nobody noticed. The Ukrainians are like, no.
I mean, in Western media, it seems like it started and it's winning. If you go to the Wikipedia article right now for Battle of Bakhmut, the last section, instead of saying like final Russian victory or whatever, says Ukrainian counteroffensive and Russian falling back. I was talking to a friend about it who is like kind of on the periphery of hearing about Ukraine, and I was like, oh, they've nearly took all of Bakhmut, and he was like, Ukraine has? Like, that's how it's been portrayed in the media.
Oh yeah, it is portrayed. I was just checking CNN this morning to see what it had about Bakhmut in there, and it was pretty silent. It was talking about Zelensky's diplomacy efforts at the G7, some new stuff about the leaks that have come out about possible covert operations that the U.S. might not have been happy about, but and that's the serious news, and most of it's just it makes it sound like Ukraine is winning. Conversely, when I flip over and ask what's going on the Russian side, I get like that Russia's winning. So it does feel very much fog of war related in the agitprop these days.
It's partly a consequence of the war being so distant from Western audiences that the names blur together. Nothing feels verifiable or tangible. So if you only have the foggiest notion of where Bakhmut is or what it is, then sure, the Ukrainians are doing great over there. They've also taken the Yellow Brick Road all the way to the Gates of Oz.
Yeah, they've taken a load of places called Grad, probably.
Novograd, Starograd.
And I mean, it doesn't really help. It doesn't really help that people perceive things so unclearly when it's unclear both for the Russian MOD and the Ukrainian MOD what exactly is the point of the Battle of Bakhmut. Because how it's portrayed in kind of Russian propaganda, non-state propaganda, is that basically they've put Ukraine into an attritional trap in Bakhmut. I don't know why my voice... I'm doing like a Kuba voice. I don't know what's happened. That they've trapped Ukraine into an attritional trap by forcing them to continually engage in this battle because they have this kind of
Verdun.
Yeah, there's no step back doctrine, and that they've degraded Ukrainian forces so much there that this is why you're coming told. This is why there has been no Ukrainian counteroffensive. But the thing is, Ukrainian, also non-state people, also claim the exact same thing, that the Ukrainians have trapped the Russians in an attritional trap in Bakhmut. And I think this is the most unclear thing at all. You can tell, if you pay a lot of attention, you can tell movement on the ground, who's going back and forth. But what's really hard to tell is who's dying and how many soldiers are in a place. Russian propagandists have been describing Bakhmut as the biggest battle of the 21st century, which I think is, I'm not even sure if it's bigger than the Battle of Mariupol. And it's certainly not bigger than the Battle of Aleppo or the Battle of Mosul. But I think how many people are engaged there, how many people have died there, is really completely obscure. So there's a possibility that it wasn't an attritional trap for both sides, because neither side have actually suffered, even like 10,000 dead or anything like this in the battle.
And there's a there's a long and proud Slavic tradition of military valor and self-sacrifice, but there's also a long and proud Slavic tradition, and I'm thinking specifically of the good soldier Švejk, of simulation, conflict avoidance, quiet desertion, I guess we could call it.
The one of the best things about this war has been Ukrainian and Russian conscripts both making the exact kind of complaint videos where they all stand in a row and make some appeal to their high command where they say, we 100% want to fight. We want to fight the hardest, but you're not giving the resources that we need to do the fight. And we're not in the right positions and blah, blah, blah. And they all say exactly the same thing.
Pirozhin, he's become a master of the genre, right? Like he could have his own like complaining podcast.
Right, yeah. The Pirozhin report.
Pirozhin wakes up every day, cries about artillery, films dead bodies, and goes to sleep.
Well, he has plenty of material. I think that one thing that we've seen throughout the course of this conflict is that neither side has an overwhelming organizational capacity and competency. They have trouble maintaining their materiel in an organized way, delivering it where it's supposed to go. They have trouble deploying people. And that, as much as battlefield turns can have consequences on the operational capacity in the course of the war. There's that, at this point, relatively cliche saying that everyone studies tactics, real men study logistics. But even on the logistical front, where there's all of this attention being paid to major weapon systems from the West coming into Ukraine, that's only one component. It doesn't matter if you get tanks, you have to operate tanks. Mm-hmm. You have to refuel them, you have to rearm them, you have to have parts and supplies.
I don't know if you know this, Kuba, but it's normal in Russian propaganda to say that all tank drivers of the new Ukrainian tanks, like the Western tanks, are all Poles. Because obviously they have to be, because the Ukrainians would just drive them into a ditch.
Is it because they're bad drivers, or have
no,
they like
because they haven't trained in Western weapons?
That may very well be. I'm a little. There's a great deal of bellicosity in the Polish nationalist camp regarding the Ukrainian war, and tank drivers, you don't see them until it gets settled. So that's an easy place to put in foreign troops.
Yeah, but as you say, like there's a lot of emphasis on Western weapon systems, and also in this strange way which treats Western weapon systems as if they're all cutting edge. Like, I think it'll be useful for the Ukrainians to get F-16s, but only in two particular senses: the sense that they can be equipped with Western missiles, and in the sense that Ukraine is otherwise running out of aircraft and the West is running out of Soviet aircraft to give it.
Right.
But the F-16 is a 50-year-old plane. It's much older than most of the planes in the stock of Russia and even Ukraine. But the F-16 is being treated as some kind of like super weapon, like the most hyper crazy thing that will show all this Eastern Bloc technology, what's for.
It's the propaganda purposes of the Western weapons deliveries at this point, especially with regard to aircraft, likely overshadow their short-term operational utility. They, with this terrible stalemate going on, both Zelensky and Putin are under a great deal of political pressure to show any kind of progress. You can't just show up to the conference call every day and be like, yeah, same as yesterday, killed some people in Bakhmut, lost some people in Bakhmut, right? Like, nobody knows where the last HIMARS shipment came in. And we've got 12 units of National Guardsmen complaining that their uniforms are too thin.
They're cold and they're rough.
Oh, they're cool and they're rough. Oh, look at us. We've got it so bad. Yeah, so you need to give people the sense that you've got something brewing that will actually change things. And that's one reason why there's so much talk about escalation, right? This stalemate is unbearable for a lot of regular Russians, for most Ukrainians, but it's also unclear how to prevent this from ossifying into a terrible new normal.
Yeah, I think about this when we think about these terms. Like, I don't know what the terms of disengagement are. Like, what would it mean to win at this point? I've argued with people who've talked about one side or the other having total victory, and I'm like, what are the victory conditions here? This feels, like most of the wars of the end of the 20th century and the beginning of this one, the victory conditions aren't even clear. Like,
I have noticed a very small stepping down in the rhetoric from like the Ukrainian Western side, where instead of saying there could be no peace until Russia is out of 1992 Ukraine, they say like before Russia has withdrawn to February 24th lines, which is of course like, I mean, it's like the situation of Ukraine before February 24th, 2022 was a really bad situation with a frozen conflict in its southeast. And the idea that it seems inevitable now that one way or another, that's going to be the same exact condition we end up in is really terrible.
And what are the next steps after that? Because while that may serve as a short-term solution, it leaves the same underlying security problems and diplomatic problems.
You feel like the peace or armistice will come with exhaustion, which just means when you aren't exhausted anymore.
Yes, exactly. You get to an Afghanistan-style fighting season situation, right? It might go on a longer cycle for rearmament and reorganization.
Right. The young men of Ukraine will work in Europe and Germany over winter, and then in summer they'll go back to Ukraine to fight.
Which might be very agreeable for the Europeans.
Should we go through the Battle of Bakhmut? What's happened over the past 6 to 9 months?
Yeah, and there's been developments today as well. So yeah, but please.
Because I think it's interesting because it seemed at points that Russia was pulling off, like as urban combat goes, like as good of a kind of strategy as you can really, but then it never quite worked out. So Russia, starting about 9 months ago, started to encroach on the outlying regions of Bakhmut. But this was after their summer offensive in Donbas, where they had moved quite quickly. And it seems like they were moving towards Slavansk, which would lead, if they captured Slavansk, well, I had it good before, it's getting worse, Slavansk, they would hold the Donbas, basically, or everything that in the Donbas which matters, which could give Putin a piece that he could sell at home. Whether he could sell it to Ukraine in the West is a different thing, but it could allow Russia to stabilize their lines and just stay where they are.
And the reason that these both Bakhmut and Slovyansk are important is they sit on north-south lines of fortification and logistics. So if Bakhmut is disrupted, is contested, Russia has more difficulty moving from the northern part of Donbas into the other parts of Ukraine that it occupies. Vice versa, if Slovyansk is captured by Russia, then the Ukrainian ability to hold that line logistically and operationally is compromised.
Slavansk is also important propagandistically because it was one of the places where the uprising started in 2013, 2014. And one of the most famous books, The Donbas War, 80 Days in Slovansk, is obviously about Slavansk. So Bakhmut was just kind of a moderately large town on the way to Slavansk. But after the operation around Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, and then the Ukrainian counteroffensives, Russia moving to conscript people, do partial mobilization, Russian offensive capacity was almost completely drained. And so they assigned Wagner to capture this city, Bakhmut. I have no idea what the initial plan was, but presumably it wasn't for it to take 9 months. And supplying them with a great deal of convicts as well as kind of artillery priority, they slowly grinded around this city, not just into the city, but around the northern and southern flanks, so that we reached a point in about 2 months ago where Russia was about to capture the center of the city, coming in from the north, the south, and the east, while also having fire control in the north and the north-south and the north and south of Bakhmut, giving them fire control over the two main roads into the city. And it seemed at that point the Ukrainians were going to withdraw. There was only a few units of territorial defense units, which are kind of the Ukrainian militia or National Guard, left in the center of the city, and it seemed like the Ukrainians were about to withdraw. It seems that Zelensky ordered otherwise, and some elite units were sent into the city of Bakhmut itself. But I think more importantly and more usefully for the Ukrainians, because it is far less attritional for them to be in these positions, lesser units were sent into the city, while these elite units guarded the approaches into Bakhmut from the west. And this prevented the Russians from encircling the city. This meant that Russia has, for the past 2 months, had to grind very, very, very slowly through neighborhood after neighborhood. The most recent change was actually them finally losing the fire control, partially over the southern road, but mainly over the northern road, with a Ukrainian counteroffensive. But this, in the end, has proven irrelevant because Russian sources have announced today that they have fully captured the city. This may not be 100% true. The Ukrainians may still control like 4 buildings or something in the very southwest of the city. But a Ukrainian brigade commander said, whether the battle ends today or tomorrow, it's going to happen very, very soon. So even on Ukrainian accounts, things are almost at an end, while on Russian accounts, things have ended today, which is very convenient for us.
Oh, we pulled a few strings. And we'll see what happens next after this. It will take some time for Russia to reestablish the logistics hub at Bakhmut, and it will require probably days to weeks to build up enough materiel for it to serve as a potential operational center. This opens up the possibility.
I watched a video of a guy interviewing civilians in Soledar, which is this small town northeast of Bakhmut. And the population of that town, according to the civilian, 4 months after it being captured by the Russians, was around 10, down from 10,000.
10 and go on, like 10 what? Somebody was asking about the socialist character of the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, and I wanted to disappoint them.
I mean, the thing is, I don't think they even ever claimed to be socialist states. The only thing they did was they used the Stalinist constitution because they felt it was kind of like the last legitimate Ukrainian constitution.
Yeah.
Also, they wanted to make Haas happy.
Because if they adopted the latest Soviet constitution, they'd have to acknowledge that Crimea was part of Ukraine. But by taking the Stalinist constitution, it isn't. But yeah, from the start, I mean, there was a lot of Reds in the uprising in Donbas. There was a lot of communists. And that in some way was a misfortune for these communists because they were on the front lines. They were the ones that were dying. And then the ones that survived were killed off slowly or sidelined or exiled into Russia by a combination of the Ukrainian intelligence services and the Russian intelligence services, as well as kind of collaborationist elements in the Donbas. And basically from then, Donetsk and Luhansk were not anything progressive beyond any concerns about national self-determination, but were rather just kind of, slightly less neoliberal states than Ukrainian Luhansk and Donbass.
Although, also, there's so little state capacity there.
Yeah.
Between the political fragmentation that spawned them, their ambiguous legal status until annexation, and the degradation of institutional capacity that comes with prolonged warfare. Basically, it's a military operations zone.
Yeah, I was gonna say even if they were sincerely communist and socialist to the man, which
they aren't.
It wouldn't really matter at this point. That like the state capacity in that area is largely shattered.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, see the efforts in Rojava to try and communalize and collectivize the country.
Mm-hmm.
Like everyone there in the administration really, really believes, but that doesn't really change much. The other thing I was going to say is that the Russians have, of course, annexed Donbas and Luhansk officially now. And I was reading that basically, I thought they were really going to screw them on the pensions or whatever, the Russians. But actually, they've kind of, they've said basically, we'll take the best of the Donbas system, the Russian system, and the Ukrainian system. Whichever one would pay you the highest, we'll pay you that one. But that's all you can really be happy about. That whatever state kind of controls the area, that they'll be slightly less neoliberal than the other one.
We saved Social Security in the Donbas.
Yeah.
And you mentioned depopulation as well, and the effects of war over such a prolonged period of time. We're seeing not just the situation in the Donbas, the outflows of refugees from Ukraine into Europe are, of course, very well known, a number in the millions. The situation in Donbas, because it's on the Russian side, has been obscured for a lot of Western audiences, but it's even more dire than areas in Western Ukraine. If you think about it, why would anybody stay that had any possible choice? And the sad reality is that this Ukraine is one of the poorest countries in Europe at this stage, and economically, it's a desperate struggle to get the resources just to flee. And if you can't, then it's a desperate struggle to get the resources to survive day by day.
And of course, the situation is very difficult for men.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
There's forced conscription on both sides now.
My Russian friend, he has his Russian family, but they're from Odessa, which is controlled by Ukraine, to be clear to people in chat. He was like, oh, my family's eventually moved back to Odessa, then quickly clarified, I just mean the women.
Mm-hmm. And we'll see what the eventual migration patterns look like at the end of this war. There's going to be a substantial number of Ukrainians that never return, that settle in Europe. And for the Europeans, especially in the reactionary turn around migration that the continent is experiencing now, Ukrainians are more palatable than North Africans or Sub-Saharan Africans or Middle Eastern refugees, especially the women, right? Am I right? Am I right, guys? The response of the UK, and I remember we brought up that piece that was run in one of the tabloids about a couple that were housing a Ukrainian refugee, and then she immediately breaks up the marriage.
And then leaves the man she broke up the marriage for.
Yes. These are your sterling victims right here.
It reminds me of the situation of Russian women after the Great Day-Off when the Soviet Union collapsed. To this day, if you're in like Korea and I think also Japan, any reference to Russian women is actually a veiled reference to sex workers because of all the fleeing and the lack of opportunity, and if they could get into to South Korea. It seems like we're going to have something like that, but more so. Because the devastation is going to be effectively worse. Plus, as Kuba has basically implied, it's a cheap migrant labor population that is not going to trigger a backlash as deeply as North Africans do, clearly. But won't that have? I mean, that's got to have long-term effects on Central European society, doesn't it? Am I wrong about that?
Well, I mean, with the Syrians, the Germans specifically had a very timed thing where they turned on the taps until they got to a certain number, then turned them off again.
Mm-hmm.
But what exactly that consists for Ukraine is unclear, because with Syria, they could use Turkey as basically like a barrier. But in the case of Ukraine, they don't really have one apart from Poland. But Poland is in Schengen, so you can't stop the Ukrainians from moving once they get there.
And I think that I wouldn't underestimate European racism.
Fair point.
And I think that I think that we may be losing sight of the positive side of European racism. Everyone always complains about it, but think about the great things it's done. By which I mean that for a lot of the City of Saints reading ultra-nationalist reactionary types, the Ukrainians are an acceptable alternative to the demographic collapse, right? The shortage of young people to work, to fight, to make babies that national conservatives are constantly bemoaning. A Ukrainian with name change disappears in one generation into most national cultures in Europe. And if they want to, precisely. And many of them, given that the alternative is going back to Kiev and dealing with bombing or forced conscription, wouldn't necessarily mind. And many Western countries, France most of all, has absorbed large-scale inflows from Central and Eastern Europe previously. Sarkozy, for instance, I believe his ancestors were from Hungary. And it's quite common to find Slavic surnames, even among the Russian elite. The French elite. They speak French and have been sufficiently Frenchified not to be threatening. But that's the result of previous generations, right? An effort 100 years ago to absorb similar flows of Eastern refugees. The longer term question will be, what does this population do to EU politics? Does it pave the way for eventual Ukrainian accession? Does it create something like the Florida Cubans?
Are the Russian Jews in Israel?
And yeah, I don't. Are there enough Ukrainian Jews for that to be a part of the?
I don't think so. I don't think so anymore. I think they already came over.
Yeah, I mean, there were millions of Ukrainian Jews in 1939. I think there's only a couple of 100,000 now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like the biggest Ashkenazi populations were from Poland and Ukraine, so they were already there. I mean, as a hyper conservatizing factor, would they be? I mean, in some ways it could lead to EU ascension. In another way, it depends on how, with things going on. For example, I know you're kind of a Macron fan, Kuba, but like, I say that somewhat ironically, but his political situation is quite bad right now, and I'm just wondering, like, you take all the stuff that's going on already in Western and Central Europe, and you throw in a bunch of assimilatable immigrants. So they're assimilatable. It's a little bit easier to deal with. There's not going to have the same kind of backlash. But I don't know. I don't think a lot of them are going to have positive disposition towards Russia, for example, or maybe even, other members of the EU, depending on their relationship to Russia. Could that accelerate, fractures in the EU? I don't know.
Well, there's a very long and storied history of using displaced populations, especially the young men among them, and as the building blocks of typically reactionary, typically nationalist militant movements. They can also, as in the case of Ireland and the IRA, lean left and have a more progressive blueprint for politics than the regimes that they're working against. I think that there's also a countervailing force, which is that exposure to the West, whether and this might be a point of contention for some people in the chat, but exposure in the West tends to de-radicalize migrants, especially if they aren't pushed to the edge of desperation through segregation into camps or denial of work permits.
It de-radicalizes migrants, except for the North Africans, where it seems to actually be a radicalizing scenario. I mean, when I lived in Egypt, we'd always talk about where the militant came from, and if you want a Salafist to come back to Egypt, you send them to France.
This is true. However, there is a bit of a selection bias there, a survivor bias, because the Egyptian Muslim North Africa, the Maghrebi youth that moved to Spain or France or Italy and stop going by Ahmed, but start calling themselves Guillaume, right? They vanish from that record entirely.
That's fair. Yeah.
The ones that keep going back and forth are often self-selected for an oppositional disposition towards French society. And there's a lot to oppose if you have a traditionalist Arab Muslim worldview. There's a lot less to oppose if you're a relatively secular Ukrainian. You show up and it's like, oh, things are just better here. And yeah, my job sucks and I have to work really hard. But you know what I had to do in Ukraine? My job sucked and I worked really hard. But here, right, like people are nicer. Even the ones that hate immigrants are nicer to me than run-of-the-mill Ukrainians are to each other. And you can potentially save up. You can maybe get a place of your own sometime.
No one here can tell if I'm speaking Russian or Ukrainian, so no one gets mad at me.
Yeah, exactly. Or everyone gets mad at me because they always assume I'm speaking the wrong one, right? That's got to happen. It's like a Goofus and Gallant thing, right? But in any case, Europe also has the advantage of not having the same geographic clustering and concentration problems as North America or the UK. There are a lot of smaller cities that are quite charming, that are well connected to larger labor markets. And because of long-term population decline, it's less of competition for resources than it would have been in the 1970s or 80s, say. There's an unfortunate political climate of crisis and polarization, xenophobia. But if you detach yourself from the political question and just think about what the, pardon the expression, lived experience of a Ukrainian migrant might be arriving in the EU, especially one that's been recognized as a refugee fleeing the conflict, there you might experience a lot of things that make you fond of your host country rather than the other way around. Certainly,
Yeah.
you know, that was the experience of my family coming to Canada. And we're not the only Polish resettled here that feel that way. The biggest danger, I think, is that right-wing groups could potentially, I can see some identity Europans being like, oh, you love Europe, eh? Because it's done so much for you, eh, Yevgeny? Well, you know what the problem is with Europe. It's like, you're going to say taxes, aren't you? Yes, taxes are very high.
I mean, that's essentially my comparison to the Russian Jews, though, is because that's the function they have played as a coalition maker with both the religious and the secular right in Israel, and I could see that happening in an assimilated Ukrainian diaspora in France and Poland and Germany is a harder question for me, actually.
There's a lot of Germans.
Yeah. And I just also see the political winds, and as hard, I am very hesitant to predict where anyone's political winds are going lately, how crazy everything is. But it does seem the political winds in Europe seem to be kind of rightward directed at the moment. And so an influx of people who are refugees, somewhat hardened by war. That's a conservatizing thing, regardless. I mean, almost in any situation, you're going to find people who are more conservative after experience of war, at least socially, if not economically. I'm not saying that you're going to have a whole lot of people who are like rampant neoliberals, but that doesn't seem to be where the European or even the American right is going right now.
No,
So,
the big thing is national conservatism,
right.
which will, I think, turn out basically to just be neoliberalism, but at least is trying to dress itself in different clothes.
It's neoliberalism with a generous welfare state for privileged categories.
On the topic of France, what did you think of Macron's kind of strategic independence thing for Europe?
Cuba.
After his trip to China.
I think that the only progressive geopolitical course is detaching the non-American, detaching NATO allies from the U.S. diplomatically, at least, so that there can be a reconciliation between Western countries and China, Russia, without needing to go through Washington, where the war footing is perpetual, is entrenched at this point. And So Macron is correct. The question is, to what extent can you operationalize that type of program? And that's much more dubious.
Especially when the Germans are doing their best to commit suicide.
Go on.
Well, they've closed all their nuclear plants.
Oh yeah.
Like as the Russians were like blowing up Ukrainian power plants, the Germans were doing it to their own, just voluntarily, after the Americans had blown up their pipeline.
Yes, we'll see how that turns out. There's the reason that I'm a little hesitant to. I think it's a bad idea. I agree. Nuclear power is cleaner than coal. It's cleaner than a lot of fossil fuel alternatives. And Germany, you've got a high-tech economy, a sizable manufacturing sector, right? Heavy
Probably
industry.
not for very long.
Well, to say it used to be that Germany was a powerhouse of European production, and was the main reason that the EU could occasionally outpace the United States in productive capacity. That Germany has not been doing that since last year.
It now costs €1 billion to like melt a single ton of steel.
What may take place is an accelerated transition to hydrogen, and perhaps some kind of larger scale green energy production, or even imports of.
We have seen that. I mean, to give the Germans a little bit of credit, we've actually in the last year seen more green development in Europe than we've seen like in the past 10. However, I don't know that the technology is there yet.
Well, that's the thing, and this is one of the perennial issues with hoping for a technological solution. On the one hand, a technological shift is absolutely essential. You can't keep going with the level of with the type of power production that we have now without catastrophic consequences. Forget catastrophic consequences. Now it's economically and logistically challenging just to maintain that level.
Oil is far too precious to burn. We need it for plastic.
We need it for speculation.
We need it for plastic speculation, and in medicine, I'm actually somewhat serious about that. So,
no, I mean, I'm serious too. Oil is too precious to burn, but we're going to keep burning it.
And the reality too is that there are certain types of fuels that are going to be the last to get sorted out. Jet fuel, most obviously, right? Like even if we got full electrification of ground transportation, you're still going to need millions of tons of airplane fuel for the foreseeable future.
So we can do stupid stuff with Su-25s and F-16s over Ukraine, right?
Obviously, the that and air shows in Nebraska. Won't anybody think about Nebraska? And there's when you look at the history of the rollout of any kind of major technological innovation, especially one that's based in the infrastructure, it's discontinuous.
Yeah.
It takes periods of acute crisis, often wars, sometimes economic depressions for resource and energy saving technologies, and you need those crises to focus political and economic actors on actually working towards implementing solutions, and then you get big changes in relatively short periods of time. Germany has experienced the same kind of institutional decay in its administrative state as other Western countries, but it started from one of the highest positions on earth in terms of that capacity. And those muscles aren't entirely atrophied. Those nerves aren't entirely oblivious. So it's conceivable.
Yeah, Russia's. And Germany's also efficient. It has to be. It's in the center of Europe. It's never been an empire. It doesn't have a ton of land. Whereas the United States,
it has one of the highest deployments of solar power anywhere in the world, despite having a climate that's relatively unfavorable.
I mean, yeah. I see the chat's talking about other side effects of the war. I mean, one of the things that we can say that it's actually taken China longer to do this than I was expecting, but China has been slowly making pretty strong diplomatic deals to weaken American power in the Middle East. Although it's also clear that America cares less about the Middle East. I think that's something that people are missing. But it's done a good job. I'm surprised it's taken it so long to do, but I suspect the zero COVID crisis of last year got it tied up, and then also trying to figure out what to do with the Belt and Road Initiative after the Russia-Ukraine war. One of the things that's interesting about I think when we talk about this in terms of the U.S. is the U.S.'s prosperity and relative physical isolation, and the fact we have good relationships with our neighbors. Relatively good relationships with our neighbors anyway, despite what the GOP might try to do in Mexico. It's actually kind of, I think, one of the reasons why we have so much political malaise, because we can get away with stuff for a long time. And I know people like in the US, I think our problems are mostly they're self-imposed bullshit. And they're serious, they're real.
I mean, who else is going to cause them?
Yeah, but I mean, we could easily Brexit ourselves over political theater. So that's a problem. But when it comes to resources, we're almost so okay as to make the next round of innovation unlikely to happen here. Because we figured out shit like oil sands and shale fracking, which is bad, but it made us we are energy independent, or at least North America is. Between us and Canada, we are.
I think the U.S. post fracking is a net exporter.
Yeah. So that changes things dramatically, but it also means we have very little incentive to really give a shit about developing viable alternatives, if we're honest. And you guys in the chat may disagree with me, but even in the Bush administration, we were really big on pushing weird new alternative energies, some of which had disastrous consequences, like biofuel. But the moment we figured out fracking, it stopped. Just going to point that out. Yes, we still do, there's still green development, but not in the same way. It's not pitched at the discourse level as nearly as urgent, even though climate change is worse.
Well,
yeah.
I'd also point out that the United States has a workforce and engineering capacity for pipelines, oil wells, you name it, all of the infrastructure of fossil fuels extraction. When it wants to set up a solar farm or a wind farm, those components are getting imported from China or Europe.
Yep.
I think that the domestic interest groups play that part of the political story of the American energy system is can't be overemphasized.
I think it's interesting to say, we've talked about kind of how America doesn't have a lot of incentive to kind of reform itself in this way. But I think it's interesting to say that at the moment, and unless kind of the Russian central bank is lying, that at least on an economic level, it's the same is true for Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Me and Kuba spoke last year, and we titled that video "How Russia Lost the War," and that was in the sense that Russia failed in even its minimum military objectives in 2022. But basically, the expectation, I've said this quite a few times before, it was that Russia was going to win militarily, but then the West was going to economically destroy it. And it was
The reverse is
basically,
true.
basically it was, we were going to see who would blink first on that. But actually what's happened is Western sanctions have proved not completely ineffective. They have done things, but far less effective than the Ukrainian military in terms of being an inconvenience to Russia. Russia, and also because kind of Western sanctions were not all implemented at once, but in stages. Like it kind of, if Russia had been hit with the oil and gas sanctions on day one, alongside the banking sanctions and so on, they might have really been fucked. But what actually happened was these sanctions were slowly put in, and Russia had time to move its markets to India and to China, and these aren't as lucrative as Western markets, but they're good enough. And after a decline in 2022, it looks like the Russian economy is going to significantly grow in 2023, a lot more than the British economy is going to grow. Though at this point, like it's pointless to even compare other countries to Britain because it was such an absolute fucking basket case.
But to say everybody's going to grow more than the British economy is going to go. We could be talking about like Guyana growing more than the British economy.
South Sudan.
There was a big conference in the EU Parliament recently by the degrowthers who were talking about, they're degrowthers.
They should be very happy in the UK.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, they're like, we need a no growth model for Europe, and it's like, don't we have that already? Isn't that literally exactly what we have right now? But yeah, so the kind of economic sanctions have failed to economically destroy Russia, or even come close to economically destroy Russia. It's able to fund its war. It has some difficulties with financing that and its social security program. It has some difficulties with importing chips. But in the grand scheme of things, I think they could keep going domestically for as long as they want, basically, in Ukraine. And that the only thing that would really prevent this would be a further ramping of Ukrainian capacity and a further Ukrainian offensives. But what I hope will happen is that no one will do any offensives, and this summer will kind of be when an armistice is signed. So I guess you follow this stuff more than me, Kuba. What do you feel in terms of how the West is feeling about this Ukrainian counteroffensive, and if kind of they're going to start saying, now is the time for peace? Because I am reminded of kind of the last 6 months of fighting ISIS in Rojava, where after we took Raqqa, I say we in a direct sense there, and we
You mean
otherwise.
you personally and two of your henchmen?
After we took Raqqa, the Epigay then spent even longer than we took to take Raqqa to take like a small town in the desert so they could get more stuff from the US and have unconditional US protection for all the time that they took to defeat ISIS. I'm reminded of that, and I'm really, because, I just don't like, it's better when people don't die. And also, a good friend of mine recently died in Bakhmut, which really hardened my heart to peace. So my hope is kind of the Ukrainians are bluffing, and there isn't going to be an offensive, but I imagine there probably will be. But what do you think the West is saying on kind of peace after this offensive?
I think that there are a few different forces that are going to determine the Western reaction. We can't lose sight of the fact that there is simply an inventory limit as to how much more weaponry the West can shift to the Ukrainian front. There's been talk of retooling towards more military production in Germany, in the United States, elsewhere. That's easier said than done. And the appetite for that type of industrial shift is limited.
Even the capacity is limited. We don't have the people necessarily in the US right now for a massive.
Well, what do you think those Ukrainians are going to do?
I mean, did you see that post on Twitter where in comparison to Austro-Hungary in 1914, the whole Western production of artillery shells is 1/8 of Austro-Hungary in 1914.
I believe that. There is an argument to be made that modern artillery shells often have IT kits attached to them to make them, to smarten them up. They go to bomb school.
The kind of the best Russian weapon of the whole war has been the Krasnopol laser-guided artillery.
Yeah.
It often, there's these flashy weapon systems that get a lot of attention, but it's often the excellent basics that make the biggest difference. So there's going to be a structural pressure towards ceasing hostilities that's just based on the reluctance to go through an expensive and disruptive industrial retooling across the West. There's upside within the military-industrial complex, of course, but one thing that we should remember is that the military-industrial complex is not a universally overwhelming phenomenon. There's military contractors in Denmark, but they're not as substantial a part of the economy, and they don't have the same impact on Danish politics or society as the American.
And they haven't been tooling for the past 30 years for a European ground war.
Yes. For the last 30 years, everyone, arms manufacturers have been trying to make high-tech pitches to Western governments or dumping arms on the international market. They aren't suited in their present configuration for this moment, and getting them up to speed would take substantial public investment. That's going to be a hard sell in a lot of countries where they're actually pretty happy not having a sizable military footprint in their economy. The one countervailing force to Polish nationalism, for instance, is the Soviet experience of conscription, excessive heavy weapons manufacturing. So even though now, if you're a nationalist, right, like, oh, the right side is in charge, we're building the right weapons and we're putting the right uniforms on our young men, there's also a substantial portion of my parents' generation and people younger than them who are like, hell no. No, the worst thing you can do is force somebody into uniform. That's something that the Soviets did, and we don't like that. So that's one pressure to try to wrap things up quickly without needing some kind of a large-scale economic transformation. You have countervailing forces, right? Like the American military-industrial complex has its tentacles.
It basically keeps the economy up in parts of the country.
Yep. And it has partners across the EU, across Asia. So there's a substantial industrial interest group that would be very happy to have a bottomless export market in the Ukraine, paid for and backstopped by public dollars from Western countries, and keep this thing going as long as possible.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem with Ukraine is an arms market, right? They don't have any money, and they're never going to have any money again.
Right. But the United States can print an almost infinite amount of money for those arms dealers, and that's the thing.
You saw the Pentagon $3 billion thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, no one even knows how much the Pentagon.
Well, I don't know if it's something to do with kind of congressional drawdown or some kind of other procedural thing in the US, but the Pentagon just went, actually, we've sent $3 billion less weapons than we thought to Ukraine, so actually we can send $3 billion more.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, with accounting in the United States, like no one knows what the Pentagon actually has. The
Pentagon
maybe the Pentagon, but they won't tell you.
behind the sofa.
Yeah, I mean, like Congress can't even effectively audit them. So, I mean, there's that. The other countervailing tendency in the states that might be positive, but it's hard to tell, is we're about in an election year, and I hate to be that crass, but it really will matter. And
yeah, I was like, imagine if we have to wait till Trump wins for peace in Ukraine. That was really doing my head in.
Oh yeah.
Ooh.
Oh,
and particularly since we're predicting since I'm predicting a recession in the next year of some severity.
Do you guys remember the Trump Palestinian peace plan?
Yes, I do.
Where like Palestine like randomly got bits of Israel, like the worst bits of Israel, like some desert, in exchange, and then they had to like move in like tunnels as if they were mole men between their cities. I'm just imagining a similar thing where like
mole men is sexist.
where Ukraine is given like the swamps of Belarus in exchange for the Donbas.
Oh God!
Honestly, take the deal. I bet you can frack those swamps. There's also an opportunity for Western countries to Saddam Zelensky. What I mean is that you'll end up with all of these notional war debts that Ukraine will never be able to pay.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's an awfully nice rare earths reserve that you got there. That's
thank you for clarifying, because I was like, do you mean we're going to hang him?
No. I mean that
Zelensky's gonna have to dance on TV until he's paid it all back.
Oh my God! Actually, no, that's actually a very interesting point.
He's going to be playing Eurovision till the day he dies.
I was about to say Eurovision is coming out of this somehow.
You can imagine that with the Ukrainian cause being such a darling of the PMC, the entertainment industry, you might end up, if you can mobilize and monetize that support, which Zelensky is an actor, right? Like, it's not entirely fanciful.
Yeah, he should literally go on tour, like the IRA.
Neoliberal Jon Stewart, yeah.
Yeah, and what he could do potentially is jiu-jitsu the vultures of peak neoliberal finance by basically Patreoning his way through the global westernized upper middle class. And you've got all of these Goldman McKinsey types salivating.
Now I just imagine Zelensky on Rogan.
Yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe. Actually, I kind of think about it this way. A road trip, Zelensky, Rogan, motorbikes, Vladivostok to San Juan de Compostela, right?
You even throw Obama in there if you want to.
I think Zelensky meets America would just be great.
Obama's a nerd.
True.
Obama's a nerd, and despite the whole don't sleep on Barry joint smoking bit that Key and Peele did, I think he's a bit of a narc too. I wouldn't trust him. Wouldn't trust him with my DMT.
I also just remembered that Zelensky promised to only serve one term.
Yeah, but he didn't say it wasn't going to be a 40-year term.
Yeah, like when are they going to have elections? And who's going to be able to vote in them?
That sounds like a Mubarak term is what it sounds like. Oh, I don't even want to think about elections in Ukraine and voting and God. I have this is a serious question that you two may be able to answer me, because I'm like, okay, we're probably looking at an armistice, but how unstable is whatever government's left out of that? And both countries.
I did just check, and Ukraine can't have elections while it's under martial law.
Okay. Cool.
So elections are suspended at the moment.
So, but what would come out of this? Would we see like Borisov come out of this? What would we see?
I mean, there's a lot of talk you see among Ukrainian nationalists at the front that like we're going to win the war, then march in Kiev. And how much that? I mean, it's fucking soldiers talk, isn't it? And a lot of it's bullshit. But there obviously is a lot of frustration on the front for what's happening in Kiev. I don't know if Zelensky is maybe an object of the hate just because he's kind of the president. But I think there's a lot of frustration outside of Kiev with people in Kiev for them basically going on as if the war
life was normal. Yeah. I think if you get an armistice on somewhat favorable terms, then my expectation is that Zelensky has an opportunity to just entrench himself as a leader for life. There's nobody else who would have a similar claim to legitimacy. And there's a long, proud tradition of deference to successful Tsar kings.
Yep. So we have Zelensky leading what is effectively Euro Belarus. So
that also creates that's an interesting comparison for a couple of reasons. Once you frame it that way, the EU has even more of an incentive to make Ukraine a success story and possibly eventually a member state. If being Russia's Belarus means you're Belarus, then what if being Europe's Belarus means you eventually get to become Portugal or Ireland?
Or Estonia.
I mean, you don't want to be Greece, but
no.
Well, let's face it, the Greeks are a unique case.
Did you guys see the article in The Economist on the Greek economic miracle?
What?
which featured in their own graphs, a graph which showed that wages in Greece have not recovered at all, have not recovered the tiniest amount, or 25% below 2008 in real terms. And the same goes for basically all measures which actually affect real people. But the miracle is because of these depressed wages, they have a massive booming export economy, which has led to the Greek bourgeoisie bouncing back.
Mission accomplished.
Of course. Yay, we've created an extractive comprador class. Woo!
It's incredible. I don't know if Greece is the smallest economy to have billionaires, but they're definitely up there, and they have several.
So that makes Greece like Guatemala.
The Greek, I actually looked into this at one point because, like you pointed out, they have several, and that's several more than they should have. And it's shipping.
Yeah.
Aristotle Onassis their way into global shipping networks when the getting was good. And now...
Right, because they're basically the first EU port after the Suez Canal and before the Suez Canal.
Oh, but it doesn't have to do with the infrastructure. It has to do with control over shipping fleets, the financialization of it, and being enmeshed in the regulatory and operational complexity, right? Like there are only a few companies that can handle giant fleets of ships, that can produce them, that can manage them. And that Greek legacy position is a source for super rents. Not only that, but they're also shady as fuck. And
it sounds like a mafia economy is what it sounds
like. Derek, the owner of Nottingham Forest, an English Premier League football club, is also a Greek shipping billionaire.
Also,
and
he's been so unfair to the poor people around Robin Hood. Such intense extraction.
He was under investigation after I think it was 400 kilograms of heroin was found in one of his boats. And then 9 of the witnesses have died.
Yeah.
Which is pretty impressive even for Southern Europe.
Yeah, that is impressive. That is Sicily levels of impressive. I just think about, like, yeah, you know, whenever you get into shipping, that you get into smuggling and you get into contraband, and that's a way to have a lumpen bourgeoisie, and that's always fun. Everybody loves lumpen bourgeoisie.
You don't have to pay taxes on crimes.
And if you get receipts for your bribes, you can get a deduction.
Yeah. You probably can, actually.
I think that a Canadian company may have gotten into trouble for that. It's like, okay, these are legitimate business expenses according to the tax code, but these are also significant international crimes according to our.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is like a tier thing where, like, if the police catch you like paying business expenses for bribes in like the Congo, they'll be like, well, you know, what can you do?
Yeah, it's like taking somebody out to a lunch here. That's also another kind of arbitrage point, or another transition point. You define corruption differently depending on where it's taking place.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's one of the things about Mexico, because there's a whole lot of Mexican corruption that's actually totally legal in the U.S. It's just, so it's not corruption here. But there's also,
no, I mean, the UK is an insanely corrupt country. It's just not, the corruption isn't to do with kind of interactions that normal people have every day. And that's basically what corruption indexes are, which is kind of like, how many corrupt things does an ordinary person have to go through every day or every year or whatever? And in the UK, very, very few. But in terms of how much corruption is happening between like bourgeois elements in the UK, it might be one of the highest in the world.
It's funny because this is one of the very few cases that I wish the measures would de-emphasize what regular people experienced, and really focus on the life journey of a dollar bill, right? I want corruption per Great British Pound or whatever. I don't want corruption per capita.
That's a fair point, because I don't pay off the local federalis here, but
you pay a lot of high taxes.
Yeah, but I know that our politicians can just be flat out traded for, so it's a kind of a different, it's a different problem. It's about the scale of interaction, right? I guess I suppose to wrap this up and tie it back to Ukraine, we've been talking about hoping that there's a peace. My fear is that the political calculus is good for peace, and on the terms of like the West providing stuff for continuing to provide viable equipment to the Ukraine without massively beefing up its arms industry, and or in the United States trying to find people it just doesn't have. However, the political calculus for it is really hard to predict. With the Democrats, like, this is one of the few things, but I know your PMs, your managerial and highly educated liberals right now, this is what they're singing about the Democrats on. I've had even fans of mine, which I'm surprised they're fans of mine actually, but who come to me and is like, well, I'm going to vote for Biden because of the situation with Russia. And I'm like, what? Okay. But I've seen it. And so that indicates to me that that's where a lot of the Democratic talking points are going to go, that they're going to be a more bellicose almost like the Republicans were in the 90s and early aughts about this war, particularly because it's a war they're not fighting. They don't lose anything from a domestic constituency from it. You know, they can look like the good guys, and we don't have to actually do anything.
And if there's anything that Americans like, it's feeling like they're the good guys without doing anything.
Exactly.
Winning without trying.
I mean, it'd be better if we could claim somebody else's
not
win.
true in Europe, right?
No, it's not. Whereas in Europe, I don't know what, like, the political calculus is hard for me to figure out. I mean, one, I think right now it looks like the Tories can literally just shoot workers in the street and probably still win.
It also doesn't really matter who's in charge of the UK.
No, I mean the Tories are polling like 20% or whatever, but Starmer announces like a bad policy literally every day. Like every day, I just see him being like, "No, we're not going to do that." Or "Yes, we are going to do this." Oh, and actually, I'm not going to do that thing I said I was going to do. Like he does that every day. He said recently, "We are the real Conservative Party," which is like, fucking shoot me.
We are the proud inheritors of the legacy of Thatcher.
We are the proud inheritors of a degrowth strategy for Britain.
But
Hobbiton 2030.
But what happens in France really matters, and you know, Macron's geopolitical strategy has always been significantly better than his domestic one. Let's put it that way.
Oh yeah, I mean not hard. He sucks at running France.
And so I know a lot of people who tell me I'm counting Mélenchon out, and I'm like, am I? Or are you being delusional?
No, Greece is having their election tomorrow.
Ah, yes. So what happens? What happens in regards to this war, for example, if Le Pen wins France? What does that mean for the EU? I mean, Maloney winning in Italy has not meant as much as a lot of people thought. But what does that mean if you actually have like a significant right-wing national conservative bloc in the EU running countries?
I think that what happens is their primary focus will be on transforming and purging the EU apparatus.
Okay. So you don't think they're going to try to just pull out of it? They're not going to pull a Brexit?
No,
they're going to redirect the money from gay pride parades to white pride parades.
Okay.
Well, it's also
free.
Just like
all
when
prides
Mitterrand
matter. Anyway, go ahead.
Just like when Mitterrand was elected as a socialist, very quickly he pivoted away from socialist program. He tried and failed.
Right.
And then towards an accommodationist entryism into EU structures, which wasn't terrible. I mean, it was the best that he could probably do. And the effects have been significant over time. The EU bureaucracy is a tremendous bugbear for the forces of the right. But precisely because they spend so much time obsessing over it, they know just how powerful and useful it is in the right hands. So rather than breaking it, they're going to figure out a way to try to capture it.
So like our right in the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
They used to complain all about the Supreme Court, and now they just took it over. So
yeah, it's a much more complicated beast because there's so many different elements to it, and you have to coordinate between 26 member countries at this point. Mm-hmm. Not only that,
we've got it down by one.
Yes, thank you. And
one of the most annoying ones, really, possibly the most annoying EU member state.
I know some people who weren't that broken up about it. Let me put it this way. And there's, I think that one reason why Maloney hasn't taken the kind of pro-Putin, anti-NATO position that that some on the right, some on the national conservative right,
or
were hoping
even
for.
like the urbanist split your babies position.
Yes, is because I mean, Orban has always, let's face it, like Orban, total slob, fat loser, no one likes him, not great at all. He's always been an outsider in a very minor EU country that is treated by the EU, by NATO, by the peak institutions of the transatlantic alliance system as a glorified Albania, right? Like not a force to be reckoned with, not somebody that you have to listen to. And
take that, Hojist. Right.
Exactly. And and as a result, he has been much more oppositional towards these structures, as he knows they can't help him in any way. They will only disadvantage him. But Italy is a major arms exporter. Italy has a very long tradition of close collaboration with the transatlantic security services, right?
I mean, they also had like the most gladioed right in all of Europe.
True. Yes.
And
like if there is a place of kind of like Nazi NATOism, it is Italy.
And the Maloney comes out of that circuit, and whatever her oppositional attitude towards globo, homo, etc., the NATO guys, NATO security state creeps are her people, and if you protect them, if you are a good soldier when it comes to Ukraine, which is someplace where the international security state creeps are all in, then you can have a voice. You can potentially be advantaged by these networks. Anybody who takes power in a major European country, whether right or left, will have to reckon with those existing relationships that, regardless of what party you come from, are the state apparatus is shot through with them, right?
Yeah, so even though Le Pen is not the same kind of gladio creature, there's still too much ties with NATO and in the EU apparatus in France for them to.
I mean, she's the daughter of a gladio creature. Don't lose sight of that.
Oh, true, fair. I mean, it would be amusing to me if it, and I know it's not going to happen, Kuba, so don't think I'm saying this seriously, but it would be amusing to me if it was a CIA created creation that actually destroyed the EU, another CIA created creation, because that would just be proper irony. But I don't think it's going to happen.
I mean, I challenge the notion that the EU is a CIA created.
No, it's not, but it's part of the Marshall Plan.
I mean, I do think at this point of kind of, well, I mean, we're at the end of unipolarity or whatever, but China's still not on a point where kind of they're funding weird guys with guns. I expect 100% the next kind of communist or socialist revolution will come from a group that were at some point funded by the CIA.
Well,
I mean, but isn't that true for everybody? Like,
exactly. If the CIA has funded everyone at some point, then definitionally,
I mean, like even Castro got U.S. foreign intelligence money, like so.
But yeah, I mean, the point is just kind of, not to worry so much about historical extraction, but kind of what are the forces acting upon them at any present moment.
And
that's a fair point.
And that's why one thing that's important to look at is the current ties, not what happened in some conflict. For instance, the YPJ, they got hung out to dry but the links between NATO European allies and the American security apparatus, they have been continually active since some cases before World War II. It's not just the elite level, but at the level of the staff, the general staff, middle and high-ranking bureaucrats. They circulate through the same conferences and educational institutions and talking shops. They have tours of duty in each other's capitals. Those types of connections are very difficult to disrupt. And if you actually get elected and you're not unredeemably opposed to the American international agenda, you can potentially turn them to your advantage.
This is something I think when we talk about multipolarity, because people talk about multipolarity as if it's one thing. That's another issue I have with it. They talk about it as if it's a net good and not just a rearrangement of how we secure shipping lanes, because it's basically what it is. But B, there's multiple ways in which it could unfold. One of the better ones is that is actually Europe as a broker between China and the US. Like, that's a fairly stable arrangement. And thus the Europeans can feel important. They can occasionally be our conscience. That's a bad thing, but whatever. So we should probably use one. We don't have one at all. But it would be that, but that does mean that they do have to like wrap the way this war in Ukraine wraps up is going to really affect not just the Russian relationship to the rest of the world, but China's relationship, because China's not. Oh, the U.S. and Russia have both had an incentive to portray China as solely the Russia's ally, but China's position in this has actually been kind of complicated, and it seems very clear to me that they would love to kind of help wrap this down, because every now and then they're like, "Wait, you guys might actually go to nuclear war over this. That's insane."
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of frustration with China from like red nationalists in Russia, because they're basically saying, like, if we lose in Ukraine, then they're going to come for you next. But I think China is thinking something quite similar there. They're thinking, if you guys lose in Ukraine, they're going to come for us next. So stop.
So you don't lose.
Exactly. There's two ways out of this, right? I think you're missing the second one.
Yeah, it's you don't want.
Well, and the
turning
flip side,
Ukraine into Afghanistan is good for only one party on the planet, and that's the United States.
But no, I think this war has been a massive boon for China overall, because it has shown its capacity to basically completely economically protect an ally.
And don't forget that the inverse is true, that if Russia wins in Ukraine, then Taiwan is next.
Yeah.
And that's, generally speaking, I just want the fastest direct line to the end of hostilities. At the beginning of the war, I really thought that meant a Russian victory, that it was just inevitable. And I'll acknowledge that mistake anytime we talk. I really thought it was going to happen that way, and it did.
I mean, literally everyone did.
Yeah. But what's the point of being?
I mean, the good thing about me and you, Cooper, is at least we're the only people on the left who actually thought Russia was going to do it.
Yeah.
Because I didn't. I was on the wrong side of that question. I'm like, I don't know. They might Georgia it, but I don't think they're going to go hard. And I was wrong.
Yeah. So. And I'm like, no, it's for real this time. There's a line you cross where it's just too expensive not to do it for real. And I don't like, if you're going to bluff, then you.
I mean, if it was a bluff, it hadn't worked, right? Because the US was like, no, we give you nothing.
Yes, exactly. We're not even going to acknowledge that you asked for anything. And the but Russia could still win, right?
Oh yeah, it could for sure.
And that would be one way of ending the conflict. I don't know.
The worry is, for me, if kind of the Ukrainian offensive completely fails, if instead of Russia being like, now it's time to clean up, they
Yes.
go, well, let's have a fucking go at Slavansk.
Yeah. I expect that, and it's interesting that you've characterized China as having an interest in keeping the Russians from overextending themselves, right? Like the don't lose rather than must win school. I was expecting, with the mobilization, the general mobilization in Russia and the loss of Kherson, that there would have to be a Russian offensive in 2023. Now that Bakhmut has fallen, we'll see if the Ukrainians make good on their promised counteroffensive. They have all of these Western tanks.
31 days of spring left.
Well, have you been to the Donbas in summer? It's magical. Fireflies.
Also, I mean, I think it's forgot about now, but last November we were talking about a Ukrainian winter offensive. It was as soon as the ground freezes, we're going to go, and then that switched to a Ukrainian spring offensive, and now we're 2 months into spring.
Yeah, I think that the Ukrainians, and there was a very interesting post about the leak, the Discord leak. The one observation made by someone who had gone through all the documents, something that I saw when I skimmed them myself, is that the position and strength of Russian units is extremely precise, while with Ukrainian units, it's just a giant question mark.
Right. I mean, it's been said quite a lot, right, that the US knows more about Russia than Ukraine.
Yeah.
Or at least they pretend to. Maybe
Exactly.
like the deep state knows everything, but
At least the normal top secret clearance doesn't know.
Mm-hmm. And it could be that. So one question is this deceit or is this incompetence? Because it could always just be incompetence. But it could also be that they're hiding something. The question is, what are they hiding? Who are they hiding it from? When we realized that we learned all of this from a guy who is a clout chasing 20-something military intelligence dude, on a Discord, then one answer as to who they might be hiding from is everybody, because they know that their people are idiots, right? The West has a lot of experience with leaks at this point, Western security agencies and government agencies.
It's also because there's too much classified, but not enough. I mean, it's also really easy to get a classification clearance. So
you say that as you say that to someone who is. That would have been useful for me about 10 years ago.
Oh, fair enough. But if you're a U.S. soldier, the biggest thing that's going to keep you out of getting a security clearance is your credit score,
or a DUI.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's not even like necessarily what level of soldier you are, and so I can't get a security clearance, but it has surprised me who I know who has gotten one.
Yeah, the security clearance is only testing for perceived loyalty, and it tolerates a great deal of vice and idiocy.
Yep.
But in any case, what's hiding behind this uncertainty? Is it that the Ukrainians don't want to reveal their position and their strength because they're planning something, and it's kind of a 3 weeks to D-Day type situation. Possible.
And the Ukrainians are probably right to, because the Americans have literally leaked these stuff.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
it was really amazing. Just like, Americans are addicted to leaking. I posted this in the group chat. The Ukrainians were like, we've intercepted all of the missiles in this strike, and then the Americans were immediately like, oh, actually, one of them hit a Patriot a bit.
Yeah, and it's like, come on, buddy, come on, man, what the fuck you do?
Like, what's
Why
the point
you gotta play
in
me like
Ukrainians even lying if you're just going to instantly reveal it?
Yeah, I thought we had sorted this out on the call, and it could also be that they're concealing how weak they are. That the meat grinder in Bakhmut has taken such a toll that it would risk shattering the morale of Western backers to share the very dangerous state of Ukrainian forces. I don't know. Right. Those are two plausible explanations as to why the Ukrainians wouldn't be providing their Western partners, on whom they depend, with information about the units. It could also be that they might also be hiding the far right orientation of certain units, right? Like,
they could be doing all of this. I think it's almost likely they're doing a little bit of all of it.
Yep, they could also be trying to inflate the number of soldiers so that on when they claim aid per soldier, bullets per soldier, they can get more than they would normally be entitled to.
I mean, yeah, they do allege to have like an enormous army.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the spring offensive is meant to have like hundreds of thousands of people in it, but those leaked documents suggested they had like 8,000 in all of Kharkov Oblast.
Yeah, and the ghost soldiers have been a major profit center for military leaders across almost all U.S.-backed.
I mean, I'm sure it goes back to the Roman Empire.
Yes, but don't forget, you have to send me the salary for Facus Maximus and Falsus Namus over there, the centurions, and
Ghostus Centurianus.
Ghostus Centurianus, Ghostus of Kievus. So that all may be reasons why this information doesn't come out. What's more surprising is someone has to have lost. Someone has to have lost like a stare off with the Ukrainian intelligence official at some point for this to even occur, right? Because even if you're broadly sympathetic to whatever purpose this concealment serves, you want to know, to do your job, what the right numbers are.
I mean, maybe at the start of the war, they didn't bother to ask because they thought Ukraine was going to fall in 3 days. And then when they did eventually ask, the Ukrainians told them, fuck off.
Yeah, exactly.
I could definitely see that.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things is, I'm not sure, like, it has seemed that the West has been actually somewhat surprised that Ukraine is lasted this long. So who knows? I mean, I'm laughing because it's dark.
They're very schizophrenic about it. It's
right.
Like it went straight from kind of Ukraine is completely doomed to Ukraine has literally killed everyone in the Russian army twice.
Yeah, some liberal friend of mine was telling me, like, Russians have lost 100,000, and I'm like, there's no way. In Bakhmut, and I'm like, there's no way they've lost. I don't believe that for a second.
That's like 4 of them died for every building or every house.
That would literally be something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 30 Afghanistan U.S. casualties worth of deaths in in 10 years, in 1 year,
Yeah,
in one city.
number,
I don't believe that for a second.
The number of funerals the Russians have had,
Mhm.
which is probably accurate but delayed by a little bit, is of mid-May 35,000 dead, which is
That sounds-
obviously way less than what the US says and what Ukraine says and what most media says, but it's a fucking lot. That's more than the US lost in Afghanistan and Iraq. I'm pretty sure it's more than the Soviets lost in Afghanistan too. It's about as much as the US lost in Korea, which is more applicable because it was a real war, but it was also 70 years ago.
So the number that I'm looking at for Soviet losses in Afghanistan over 10 years was 15,000, so less than half. And these are also considerable losses in military, which has moved away from a very easy conscript and replace type system. Takes longer to get soldiers trained up. One reason why Wagner is such a useful tool for the Russian state is because it's a channel that allows you to very quickly dispose of a certain kind of manpower and convert it into cannon fodder. And on that cheery note, why don't we just reiterate that we would all like the war to just end as quickly as possible with an armistice. And this may just be me, but I think that a regional peace conference is absolutely essential. Without a punitive and don't, Germany after World War I, Versailles, whoever loses.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, like people are talking about, the only justice in Ukraine would be not only for Russia to leave the Crimea, which they said they would defend with nuclear weapons, but that Russia has to basically pay for every dollar that the US has put into Ukraine.
Oh my
basically,
God.
the Russians have to pay the big debt. That's the Western explicit plan for how they'll get out of it. But yeah, none of that's going to happen. And let's hope we can have some kind of plausible peace.
I mean, both sides have to be able to save face in this piece, right? Like that's the thing. And I do worry that sometimes our military elites have lost sight of what we teach ninth graders in high school. Like, hey, it's bad when you're super punitive at the end of the war because it led to World War II, you fucking morons. But anyway, so hopefully it's better than what it feels like it's going to be.
I'm going to press the outro button.
Do it.
We are out.